Chapter 31, Conundrum. "Stop! Stop!" yelled Sven. Jason glowered. "What?" "I said to get that shit out of here. If I see another fancy-ass spin, I'll fucking demote you back to Group A," Sven said with a tone that would take no nonsense. Kai snickered off to the side. He was sitting on the ground watching Sven and the newly moved-up Jason spar. There was some satisfaction seeing the noble brat getting his ass handed to him. Nicholas likewise had a small smile, sitting next to Kai, watching the fight. A short 2 months had passed since his visit to the church and blacksmith. Kai had received word his armor would be ready within the week. During these 2 months, he had grown very little. There had been 2 more expeditions for the field training class, during which he gained a whole whopping 6 levels. 3 from the first trip, 2 from the second, and 1 additional level out of the blue. It had become something of competition amongst his group to secure kills. He had put 10 stat points into strength and intelligence each. With his intelligence now being 50 total, his gravity magic should theoretically be able to increase the gravity of an area by 100%, if what Nock told him was true. This would essentially make the weight of his opponents double. He split his 10 remaining points into endurance and wisdom, giving him a minor boost. The second and third field expeditions had been uninspiring. Nothing much had happened besides slaying a few weak monsters. His group did come across something in the forging stage again, and though it had been weaker than the Grove Panther, the instructor ended up assisting the group in killing, since there was still no teamwork or unity in Group 2. After the first expedition, there had been a lot of backlash from parents who heard about the incident regarding the student dying. It had even reached the level of the king who had ruled the policy was inane and detrimental to the growing leaders of the country. The headmistress had been silently punished, but had been allowed to keep her position. The instructor had not been punished since he had been following the commands of his superior. The academy, which had a mostly shining reputation, had suffered at the hands of one bad decision. Both should have been fired in Kai's mind, but the headmistress likely had connections and influence. Looking at Nicholas, the large young man had grown even more than him in the past few months. Human forging level 19. Their group appeared to be having quite a lot of success finding monsters during the trips. "I've heard you guys are having trouble in your group," Nicholas spoke to Kai, his eyes not moving off the fight. "Yay," Kai said deponently. "Why not just go deeper into the forest?" Kai sighed. "There is absolutely no coordination between the people in my group, so challenging stronger monsters isn't an option. We won't get any levels if the instructor has to intervene in every fight because of the lack of teamwork." "I guess that's true," Nicholas said. "Listen, Kai, there is something I'd like to discuss with you." "Shoot." "Shoot." Nicholas tilted his head in confusion. "Oh, it means to go on. Like proceed with what you were going to ask," Kai said. "That must be a saying from my past life that didn't keep." Kai squeezed his eyes, annoyed at his blunder. Nicholas took in a deep breath. "Right. Do you fancy Ashley?" His tone was hesitant. Nicholas seemed downright uncomfortable asking. His mouth was a thin line as he clenched his jaw. "Wait, fancy?" Kai couldn't help it. He started laughing, drawing attention from the people around him, including the still dueling Jason, who got smacked good for his distraction. Nicholas looked downright embarrassed. "No," Kai chuckled. "I'm not interested in Ashley. Why do you ask?" No reason. Just wondering," Nicholas said, lying badly. "Could it be you like Ashley?" Kai covered his grin as he spoke in a light-hearted tone. "Feels like my adolescent years all over again." "Wait, crap, I am an adolescent." Kai pinched the bridge of his nose for a second, freezing slightly at what he heard next. "No," Nicholas squeaked in a high pitch. "I mean no, she's great, but I don't like her like that." Nicholas was covering his face with his hands. Kai thought it strange. Nicholas's voice sounded slightly fearful when he answered, but it could have been nervousness to admit he liked her. "Why did you ask me then?" Kai questioned. Nicholas remained silent for a minute. "She wanted to know what you thought of her." Kai shrugged. "It's not like I know her well. She's pretty and has been kind to me, but I feel like she has an agenda. I simply can't trust her. And she's too young." "She's technically not a noble," Nicholas said. Kai whipped his head, looking at the prince in question. "I told you, Ashley and her father have a special status in the Ashbourne Kingdom. That status is an authority granted by my father the king to her family, which to my knowledge is only her and her grandfather. Her grandfather, the sole emperor, is an old friend of my father's. He brought his newborn granddaughter Ashley to live here. For whatever reason, my father gave them special status. They don't have to answer to no one in the kingdom except my father, Nicholas explained. Sole Emperor. That's quite a title, Kai remarked. He is supposedly the strongest soul mage amongst humans. Ashley wouldn't tell me what stage he is in, only that he was stronger than my father. Okay, Kai dragged out. What does that have to do with me? Why would she be asking if I like her? I don't know, man. You're a good-looking enough guy. He gave a pointed look at Kai, as if telling him not to let it get to his head. But you are nothing special as you are right now. There are plenty of other good-looking guys across the kingdom with actual status and power. Like you? Kai asked. My father, with what little life he has left, would love for Ashley and me to marry in order to physically tie her and her grandfather to the Ashbourne Kingdom, but she doesn't like me like that. I'm more of a toy for her to play with. Nicholas shivered slightly. When she received her soul magic, she would poke and prod my soul, teasing me. Did you have your magic yet? Kai asked. No, I was still considered a mortal, not yet 16. She's a month older than me. I thought it was illegal to attack mortals if you had magic. It is, but who's going to tell the soul princess what she can and can't do? Poor guy. I would have told my father had I not already known that he would tell me to suck it up, Nicholas lamented. He looked on the verge of tears, remembering the pain that Ashley had tormented him with. It's not like she was doing permanent damage to my soul, or so she claimed. Kai's eyes were wide with concern. I'm not a foremost expert on the soul, but I don't think damage to the soul is a good thing. He spoke with growing distress. She wasn't being malicious. I think, in any case, I'm fine. Her grandfather would always check up on me and confirmed everything was good. If you say so, Kai gave a pat on the back to the glum-looking prince. The 4 roommates and Aani were having dinner in the cafeteria. Aani's tail swished in the air happily as she devoured her dessert. No one bothered to compete with the fox anymore in an eating contest, though she still received the odd glance from the other students. Heard you've been getting pretty chummy with the prince, remarked Andre. Grunting, Kai kept his focus on his food. At least his majesty still deigns to eat with us lowly peasants, teased Hector. Ha ha, Kai laughed dryly. I apologize, your majesty. One of us should have tested your food for poison beforehand. If looks could kill, his majesty would have us hung in the gallows, joked the quiet Sean. True to his word, Kai gave them each a glare that promised retribution. Kai, I heard from Nock everything will be ready tomorrow. Do you want me to come with you? Andre said, changing the subject. Kai's whipped his head up to make sure Andre wasn't messing with him. There was no indication on Andre's face that he was joking. Kai mentally fist-pumped. I'll be fine. I think I can manage to find my way there, Kai said, smiling. Aani yapped once, drawing the attention of the students around them. Although it was less than usual, most of the students had gotten used to her antics. Aani had become very popular amongst the ladies in the academy who always asked to hold her. She enjoyed basking in the attention. Seeing her plate empty, Kai went to go fill it up. On his way back, he heard his roommates discussing what to do for the rest of the evening. I'm free of obligations for my lord tonight. It's rare the 5 of us are available for once. Hector spoke to the group, giving Aani credit when he noticed her scowl at him. What can we do? Sean asked. Well, there is the common area, where many students hang out, and the training areas are still open for a few more hours, Kai answered. Leaning in, Guys, let's go out and pick up girls, Andre whispered excitedly. Awkward looks were exchanged between the group. I actually have a girlfriend already, Hector spoke up. Andre looked at the traitor, disbelief written across his face. He looked to the other 2, a small smidgen of hope in his eyes. Not interested, Kai denied flatly. He had no interest in becoming distracted by girls at this time. Ashley flirting with him all the time was enough of a hassle. Never talk to a girl, Sean said, looking down at the table. Defeated, Andre's head fell onto the table's surface. Silent sobs whacked his body. How about we spar a little, Kai said. With magic, he added. Boo, Andre jeered. He's always training, Hector said. Come on, we are at an academy to learn magic and how to fight. Shouldn't we be taking advantage of that? Yes, Kai, but not everyone is in such a rush like you, Andre pointed out. Maybe he has a point. Leaning in, Hector whispered, I've heard rumors of a possible civil war in the near future. What? Andre yelled. Shh, Hector quieted him. A few people were staring at their group, but most had gone back to their own business. How do you know this? Sean leaned in, interested. My lord told me. There have been rumors of discontent among the nobility about the first prince inheriting the throne upon the king's death. The first prince is something of a buffoon, and not even close to the power of his father. But the third is rumored to be near the king's power and is popular among the nobility. The nobility desires a strong leader, especially since we are in an ongoing war. And that's not even politics, that's just inheritance. Sounds like a pain, though. I'll have to ask Nicholas his opinion. About the war, why doesn't one side just hire powerful mercenaries to fight on their behalf? Kai asked. It was something he thought about. Beyond the Ashborn kingdom, there were bound to be plenty of very powerful individuals that could end the war in days if they choose to. Why didn't the king just hire a few of them to fight? Sean quietly observed the conversation with interest. There are actually more issues with that idea than you would think. I mean, just imagine you invite a foreign entity to your kingdom. Who could control such an individual? There is also the issue of payment. I can't even imagine the amount of platinum or items it would cost to hire someone of that caliber. And once one side hires someone like that, so will the other. Then no one wins, Hector said softly. Wait, what about the sole emperor? He has been in the kingdom for a while now, Andre asked. As far as I know, he hasn't made any move to join the war. There is no reason to think he will now, Hector said. The next few minutes were spent between Andre and Hector, discussing how a civil war would impact the kingdom. After a while, Kai got tired of the conversation. Guys, we have lost sight of the original question. What are we doing to do tonight? All he received as silent shrugs. Chapter 32. Trouble. The buildings were beginning to look familiar as he closed in on Nock's smithy. He had only gotten lost twice on his way, but he was certain he was almost there. Aani, the lazy, gluttonous fiend, was sleeping curled around his sweaty neck. Kai was used to her behavior, but he wished she could have at least helped him find Nock's place. At this point, after spending so much time with her, he knew she understood everything he was saying. The adorable little fox was intelligent enough to not only comprehend what he said, but respond. She was truly a strange being. Almost every monster Kai had fought to date didn't possess a modicum of sentient, comprehensive intelligence. They were all driven by instinct instead. He had no idea why she joined him here in the capital. Perhaps it was at his grandfather's request, or she was motivated by seeking out new exciting foods outside of the village. Both seemed probable. Even after 16 years of knowing her, he was still learning new things about her, like her distaste for super spicy food. Kai couldn't deny he found amusement at her antics when she had tried some super spicy ramen the other day, but for as great as her companionship was, she drew a lot of attention. At last, Kai yelled. He had been searching for the last hour, even though it should have taken him only 20 minutes to walk there. Aani growled lightly, possibly warning Kai to keep quiet and not disturb her nap on his shoulders. He walked up to the massive steel door and rapped his knuckles against it. No answer. Knocking once more, he finally heard someone call out, "What's the password?" Password? Oh, that crap again. I'm not doing it. Knock, open up, please. A moment of silence passed. Password, came his gruff voice through the metal door once again. Knock, knock. Kai felt a small piece of him die inside. He was glad no one was around to see this. Who's there? Kai banged his head against the metal door. No more, please. After a few seconds, the metal door swung open effortlessly. The giant Nock stood in the doorframe looking down at him with pity in his eyes. Kid, you need to lighten up. Being so serious all the time can't be enjoyable. I'll take it under advisement, Kai said dryly. Aani vanished from his shoulders, teleporting onto the ground before she began walking through Nock's legs into his smithy. Without missing a beat, Nock smiled. "Come on, the armor is ready." 9 pristine, plainly designed, dull white armor pieces appeared on the table, causing an instant reaction in the room as the lights dimmed significantly. Bright ethereal wisps formed as they danced across the armor in a random pattern. Kai's breath was taken away as the beauty of it. Turns out alderlight is quite adept at absorbing heat as well as light, making it difficult to smelt down. I had to acquire a different method of smelting the ingot. It is one of the most beautiful metals I've ever worked with. They look amazing, Kai spoke honestly. Glad you like them, Nock chuckled. Kai picked up the helmet, examining it. The non-reflective white metal looked clean and smooth as he turned it over. He noticed there were 2 small wings on the helmet, one on each side near the top. Sensing what he was looking at, Nock said, "I had a little bit of extra metal, so I added a little flourish." Kai nodded. It looked impressive. A true warrior's helmet. Turning it around, the inside was layered in red material. It felt cool and fuzzy to the touch. Giant fire salamander leather, resistant to heat, and should give your noggin a little cushion if you get hit too. But don't actually get hit in the head if you can avoid it. I have no idea how this armor will do in battle. How do they hold up against attacks? Knock yourself out, Nock said with a grin. Kai groaned a little, but proceeded to drag his sword out of his scabbard. Aani sat on the table 5 feet away, watching the two, quietly observing. Taking a stance, he raised his cold iron sword above his head, aiming at the breastplate. It was the largest piece. Activating his heavy blow ability, he simultaneously slashed downwards. The sword clashed into the chest piece, bouncing off. Examining it closely, there was a tiny mark where the sword connected. Not even deep enough to be called a scratch. No actual damage could be seen. Nock whistled. Wow. Nice blade, cold iron, right? And that attack was much stronger than I would have guessed a Foundation Realm kid would have. Made my heart race for a second. He said that last part with a smirk. Kai's looked at his sword, finding it likewise undamaged. Kai, if you don't mind me asking, is the sword the only weapon you use? Nodding, he answered, "It's the weapon I grew up learning." Have you not considered using other weapons? Just imagine the damage you could do with a warhammer or mace. I did think about it. I know bludgeon weapons would work well with my magic too. But I can't carry that many weapons on me. The more weight I add, the more burdensome it will become in battle, and I already don't move fast, especially with my new armor. I understand you. He scratched the side of his face with his smithing hammer. Can you not simply buy an item of storage? I'll be honest, I have no idea how much one costs. Well, I'm not too up to date on the prices, but a cube just large enough to fit a sword would cost around 2 platinum coins, and they rise in price as the area inside goes up. Kai shook his head, disappointed. For a moment his hopes had risen, but between school, the new armor, and feeding Aani, he only had about 1 platinum coin equivalent left. Shame. Maybe when you save up and buy a ring, you can try out other weapons with your magic. Teleporting onto the table, Aani strolled up to the armor and began inspecting it herself. Nodding sagely, she placed her right paw on it, causing more wisps to appear. They kept appearing until the once non-reflective armor was beginning to shine strangely. Kai swore he almost saw the armor move, only barely off the table. Withdrawing her paw, she looked up at Kai and nodded once, apparently giving her approval. Nock's smile became even larger. Now that we have your guardian's approval, we can move on to money. Kai happily paid the man. Nock spent the next few minutes showing Kai how to properly put the armor on. All in all, Kai now owned an alderlight chest piece, helmet, braces for the front of his shins and forearms, 2 shoulder pads with interlocking plates leading down the shoulder, and a tacit cover for the waist. All of his vitals were covered, but he still had plenty of exposed areas. You going to wear it back to school? Nock asked him. I don't think I should. I'm likely to get ambushed with armor this flashy on the way back. Is there any ways you can have this delivered there for me? I unfortunately don't have a storage ring yet, and I doubt it's a good idea for me to be walking around outside with this beautiful armor at my level without supervision. You got a point. Even if this is the capital, it still has its issues. Sure, for 1 silver I can have it brought to your academy's post station. Kai agreed and pulled out a silver coin. He didn't bring all his coins with him, but he knew he was starting to hurt for coins if he kept spending them at this rate. When living in a self-sustaining village, Kai never had money to spend. So he wasn't sure if 80 gold coins was a lot or something that could be earned in a year by the average worker. Something told him it was the former, considering a meal cost a few coppers. Thanks, Nock. It looks incredible. He held out his hand. Nock reached out, completely covering Kai's hand as they shook. Good luck, kid. Stepping out of the smithy, Kai had a wide grin on his face. He started horribly whistling a tune as he made his way back to the academy. He couldn't tell what time it was because of the enchantments, but he guessed it was a few hours until dinner. It wasn't long until he was lost again, souring his mood. I thought that last left would get me back on track, Kai mumbled to himself. He grabbed Aani underneath the arms, holding her out in front of him. Time to pay your rent. Lead me back to the academy. The only response he got was a yawn before she promptly fell back to sleep in his hands, her head lulled to the side. He had some choice words for her like freeloading and lazy. Aani, we can get some food at the cafeteria if you help me find the way. She sniffed into the air a few times before going back to sleep. Apparently that wasn't incentive enough anymore. But he didn't want to bribe her with restaurant food for just leading him back to the academy. Kai gathered the lazy fox into his arms and picked a random direction. He'd ask the next person he saw for directions. Unfortunately, he was on an off-street at the moment, and he had to find his way back to the main road. Strolling through the streets, Kai was lost in thought admiring the buildings. They weren't simple wooden houses like his back in the Kitsune village, but small homes made of stones and bricks. There was a uniformity that made them all look similar, making it easier for him to get lost. Whoever designed this city and buildings sucks. I can't find my way if everything looks the same. After a minute, he finally found someone and asked them how to get back to the academy. The woman didn't know the direct way since the academy was in the noble sector, but he got a general idea. A few minutes later, Kai was passing a rather large inn when he heard sounds of a struggle nearby. Let me go, came an annoyed female voice. A few passers-by were looking into an alley before walking away. One, in particular, hurried down the street away from the commotion. Kai peered into the alley, seeing 3 male individuals crowded around a young female. The alley was fairly well lit because of the enchantments overhead, making it so the light shined straight down at different angles. Hold on, sweetheart. Henry has taken an interest in you. You should hear him out. One of the men spoke, his voice deep and heavy. The man who Kai assumed was Henry was decked in a blue silk-collared tunic with short orange hair like a carrot. He had a leer on his face that instantly made Kai want to punch him. The guy blatantly ogled the girl, who appeared even younger than Kai, which meant she probably didn't even have any magic yet. Human? Kai made a face of disgust. How cringy. The comment didn't go unnoticed as the noble turned around. Who said that? His eyes focused on Kai. Kai now had the attention of all 4 individuals in the alleyway. The 3 men were glaring at him while the young girl was silently pleading with her eyes. Small tears fell as her wrist was being held by the large men to the side. Kai looked to his sides to see if anyone was going to help. But no, everyone who had been looking down the alley had backed off, leaving him alone and the complete focus of the group. Aani remained sleeping in his arms, unbothered by the tension. Leave. This doesn't concern you, commanded the smallest of the group, still only a few inches shorter than Kai. The 2 minions had swords attached to their belts, while the leader possessed no weapons, but had a ring, which probably had a weapon inside. Kai was beginning to learn that items of storage weren't as rare as in his village, at least for the average nobility or wealthy individual. The 2 minions looked like bodyguards, but didn't address the man as lord, so it was likely he wasn't a noble. Kai tensed when the small man started moving towards him. He didn't know what to do. He just hoped the person who ran off earlier was getting the guards. This was one of the moments he knew he should mind his business, but his feet remained firm on the ground. Human? Shit, even the bodyguard is beyond my identification range. Kai squeezed his fists hard, nearly drawing blood as he turned away and began walking down the street once again. There was nothing he could do. The three men laughed as Kai began walking away. Kai's eyes darkened. His expression grew more turbulent by the second. He was angry at himself for being so weak, angry at those assholes for preying on a young girl. His mind was spinning, trying to figure out what to do. The sad new truth of being reborn was that he was powerless now. He couldn't even protect himself if anything happened. Not my business. I'm no longer a hero. He spoke to himself quietly, trying to convince himself, not my problem. There were plenty of other people there. Someone will do something. He heard a scream. The next thing he knew, he was back at the entrance to the alley. The young girl was on her knees, arm being held above her head by the goon who still held it. Her eyes were squeezed in pain. "Hey," he yelled. "She said to let her go." Kai's voice demanded authority. The reaction he received was not one he was expecting. They all started laughing, except the girl who looked up with renewed hope in her eyes. Kai grimaced at the blatant disregard. "Look, a white knight has appeared." Henry slapped his leg, obviously finding it funny that Kai would interrupt. "The guards are on their way. Leave her be," Kai lied. He had no idea if anyone was coming to help, but he had to try something. Another round of laughter rang out. Kai narrowed his eyes as the small man started approaching him once again. Akan mewled as he set her down gently to the ground. Her eyes remained closed, ignoring all around her. He silently dragged his cold iron sword out of its scabbard. The small man looked back to his boss, who nodded once. A cruel smile graced the small man's face as he drew a wicked-looking blade out with teeth meant for sawing, not slicing. Somehow during the distraction, the girl had pulled her wrist out of the large man's hand before she bolted away without looking back. Kai sighed with relief, but it was gone a moment later. Henry's eyes simmered with undisguised anger. "Take his hand," he ordered to the small man. Kai's eyes went wide. He widened his stance as he prepared for an attack. His magic was prepped, ready to be activated at any moment. Chapter 33, Ash Warden. "Hold," came a commanding voice from above. Peering up, Kai saw a man floating in the air. No, not exactly floating. Coils of ash extended out of the man's back, propping him up into the air like spider legs, perched off buildings. He wore armor similar to the guards he had seen around, only his was a little more intricate. Hexagonal plates made up the armor, covering him from neck to feet. They were the same grey as the city's walls. The man lowered himself, tendrils of ash maneuvering him down the alley until he was standing on the ground blocking Kai in. "Lord Warden," Henry bowed from the waist. Kai noticed that even the two henchmen were kneeling with heads bent down in respect. The small man's sword was out of sight. Kai, a little slow on the uptake, put his sword away. A move that didn't go unnoticed by the Lord Warden as his gaze fixed on Kai for a moment before refocusing on the noble. "Explain," the Lord Warden demanded. Despite that they were all on even ground, Kai could tell the man was looking down on everyone, even the rich-looking Henry. "Yes, sir. My name is Henry Tabitath, merchant and auctioneer of the Strauss House on the main road inn." "Tabitath? I thought Ronaldo Tabitath was the owner of the Strauss House," interrupted the mysterious warden, giving the merchant an even more critical gaze. "He was, sir. He died in combat on the front lines, not 3 weeks ago, delivering goods and weapons to the soldiers. As his oldest, the title fell to me." Henry took on a gloomy, crestfallen face. Kai's cynical thoughts believed the man was playing it up. "I see. I'm sorry for your loss, Henry Tabitath. Your father was a good and generous man from what I hear." The warden expressed his condolences. "Thank you, Warden. Now explain the situation. I have business at the palace shortly," the warden said. "I am currently visiting the capital, looking to hire new staff for my estate. After eating, we were traveling when someone bumped into my friend here." He pointed to the short man, who now stood. Kai had a sinking feeling in his gut. It was the same feeling when he was about to fight a tough monster. His instincts were telling him to get the hell out of there. Unfortunately, he was trapped. The warden was blocking the alley exit, while the other three were obstructing the other way out. To my friend's surprise, his coin pouch went missing. We followed and confronted the thief, he pointed at Kai. And when we asked for it back, he immediately drew his sword out, threatening our lives. The noble lied smoothly. Kai was stunned, speechless. What a piece of lying crap. The pressure of the warden's gaze rooted him firmly in place. There was no possible way he could escape this man. I'll take him to a guard station before I proceed with my business, the warden responded. Quicker than Kai could blink, the warden was upon him, grabbing his arm tightly. Kai yelped in pain. His tunic was pulled up, revealing his hidden coin pouch, before it was deftly grabbed and thrown over to the small man, who was grinning as he caught it. Hey, that's mine, Kai called out. He was pissed. His face was turning red with anger. He had left most of his remaining money home, but he still had about 10 extra gold coins in there. Stop resisting, or you're going to end up hurt. The warden's voice was laced with authority. Are you even going to listen to my side of the story? Kai turned his head to look at the warden behind him. Now that he was getting a closer look, the warden's face was littered with scars, the most prominent one going across his nose and right eye. I just heard it. You three need to report to a guard station later to fill out a report. The warden started pulling Kai away towards the street. Unable to resist, his heels dragged across the cobbled ground. He looked to Aani, who was on her back napping, a smirk on her face. That little rascal. Your meal ticket is being arrested. Kai shot her a scowl. He was growing desperate as he was finally brought to the street. Who had been ignoring the situation beforehand was now solely focused on it. Kai felt the gazes on him, some filled with pity, others just didn't seem to care, only watching for the entertainment. Wait, those three were assaulting a young girl, Kai called out in a desperate last bid to clear his name. The warden paused before turning to the three who were walking away to the other exit of the alley. He gave a questioning look to the group of three. The two minions started withering under his glare, but Henry held strong. There was a young girl we were discussing the possibility of her joining my staff. There was absolutely no assault. She left after we began chasing him, or she would collaborate my story. He lied blatantly. Kai sent the man his death glare. If looks could kill, Lord Tabitath would have exploded on the spot. Should have just minded my business. Last time I get involved with this shit again. Kai's head flopped down as he lost hope. He was too weak and lacked the influence to stop anything. The only shining light was that the girl had escaped, although he wished she had stuck around so she could tell this mysterious warden the truth about the situation. He was going to be arrested and robbed, and there was nothing he could do about it. I've seen enough of this travesty, came a new voice from out of sight. Kai recognized that sweet voice. He did not know whether to groan or cheer out. Lifting his head, Ashley stood before him in a light blue sundress. A large floppy hat covered her head, keeping the artificial light out of her eyes. She was smirking, clearly finding the situation funny. The audience's attention had shifted from Kai to Ashley, who stood out among everyone with her strange attire. Release him, she demanded. With no other words, she moved her hand into an arc, and a badge with illustrations appeared. Kai couldn't see what was on the badge before it was tossed over to the warden, who quickly snatched it out of the air with his free hand. Frowning as he looked at it, his eyes went wide. Immediately Kai felt his arm released. The warden kneeled on one knee, head down, similar to a man about to be knighted in those fables he was read as a child. Only the warden looked more subservient. Whatever that badge is, I want one. My lady, the warden spoke with reverence, before you mar this city's reputation even further, I suggest you conduct an actual investigation and interviews into the events before arresting an innocent individual. She spoke with an icy tone. The displeasure was obvious, as her sweet and usually inviting eyes turned cold when she looked down upon the warden. Kai had only seen this side of her with Jason. Yes. The warden squeezed his eyes closed. Lucky for the both of you, since you deigned an investigation below yourself. I happened to witness the situation, Ashley said. With the authority granted to me by the Ash monarch, Emilio Gilmanash, king of the Ashborn kingdom, I, Ashley Mori, authorized the arrest of Henry Tabitath for assault on a mortal, intimidation, lying to an official officer of the kingdom, and being a lecherous scumbag. Yes, my lady, the warden shouted loudly. Returning the badge gently to Ashley, the warden moved in a flash. Kai could barely see it as he vanished down the alleyway towards the retreating trio. Stepping in front of him, Ashley blocked his vision. She looked into his face, her cold stare turning warm. She reached out, grabbing his hands with hers. "Hey, you!" Kai allowed her to grab his hands. "Hey, thanks for this," he spoke sincerely. Her hands were warm in his. He tried peeking around her head to see what was happening, but she moved her head to the side, blocking his vision. "You're welcome. Truth be told, I would have stepped in to stop it sooner, but when I saw you come back to the alley demanding they let go of the girl," she reached up and fanned herself with her hand. "It made my heart go a-flutter." She smiled deviously. Kai heard terrified screams coming down the alley. Ashley let go of his hands and reached down, picking up Akan, who was now sitting and watching the events unfold. The fox lifted her front legs, making it easier to be picked up, causing Kai to laugh once aloud. "Might be the softest thing ever," Ashley whispered, her eyes glazed over. Holding Akani had some kind of drug-like effect on people. She snuggled Akani into her chest and sighed happily. The warden returned, dragging the three figures behind him. They were all unconscious, bruises all over their face. "I believe this is yours." The warden dropped Kai's coin pouch into his hand in addition to a second. Kai looked up to question the man, but the warden was already bowing to Ashley before walking away, the unconscious trio being dragged along the cobbled ground as Kai had only a few minutes earlier. He hadn't apologized, but Kai didn't care enough to pursue it. He was just happy enough not to be arrested. "What are you doing now?" Ashley mumbled, her face burrowed into Akani's fur. "We were on our way back to the academy for dinner." How about we go out to dinner instead? I know this amazing restaurant. Best food in the city." Akani perked up, staring daggers at Kai. Noticing Kai's hesitation, Ashley spoke up. "You would turn down a date with such a beautiful young lady. Why is she so interested in me? I'm no one important. Perhaps I can find out more if I go out with her." His stomach decided at that moment to growl loudly at the idea of food, making Ashley smile. "Fine, dinner, but this is not a date," he relented. She gave him a knowing smile. "This way." She turned around and began leading him down the street, still carrying Akane. Kai was very conscientious. Almost everyone they passed by was staring at them or giving them looks. He was getting looks of envy, while Ashley was receiving looks of lust. Her outfit had an appeal to it, which was definitely meant to attract attention. It made him wonder where she was the entire time during that situation. Someone who stood out as much as she should have been easily spotted. "Should you be walking around without a bodyguard?" Kai whispered. He twisted his head, looking around for such a figure. "You're basically royalty and—" Kai cleared his throat. "Very pretty too." Ashley's cheeks reddened. "Or, worried about me?" "That's sweet." She paused for a moment, giving him a flirty look. "You'll protect me, won't you?" She winked at him. Kai gave her a deadpan reaction, drawing laughter from her. "I have a bodyguard. He wouldn't be doing a good job if he was easily spotted, though. I don't even think the warden noticed him," she surmised. Kai looked around but didn't see anyone. Not that he expected to. His sensory abilities were basically non-existent at this time. He missed the days when he could feel the blood around him. Almost no one could hide from him then unless they were out of range of his ability. "Who was that man?" Kai questioned. He had to be someone important for even a baron to show respect to him. "The warden?" She looked to see Kai nod. "The man is an Ash Warden, one of an unknown number of elite soldiers who traverse the land and mountains in the Ashborn Kingdom. They are equivalent to the royal guards, except they handle tasks outside of the palace and report only to the king or their commander," Ashley said. The warden reminded Kai of himself in his past life, an elite soldier exploring the lands, fighting monsters, and saving people in the process. They walked in silence for a few minutes before Ashley spoke up. "Here we are." Chapter 34. A date that's not a date. Food Vibes. What a strange name. The restaurant was nearly as large as an inn. It stood out around its neighbors with its blue-colored bricks. And unlike all its neighboring buildings, it also had a small line leading from the entrance. Ashley bypassed the small line outside, heading inside, straight to the podium, where she received odd looks from the people in line. Some were filled with envy, others lust, mostly from the guys. One gentleman even got hit in the arm for looking too long from his partner. Kai chuckled to himself silently while following behind Ashley and Aani. "Greetings." "Ah, Lady Ashley, a pleasure to see you again." A well-dressed man in black plants and a white button-up stepped out from behind the podium, performing an impeccable bow. "Hey, Marty, good to see you." She flashed a smile to the young man. His cheeks colored red for a moment before he turned back to the podium and rang a silent bell. A moment later, another individual similarly dressed arrived, prompting them to follow. Kai followed them through the restaurant where he received looks of jealousy. The three were seated in a private room with menus placed in front of them. Kai watched the staff give a curt bow before leaving the room and closing the sliding doors. A small hum began once the doors closed, making the sound outside of the room noticeably softer. Ashley smiled. "We can talk privately now." Aani leaned over the table's edge, scanning the menu. She was downright salivating, a little drool leaking out before she wiped it away with her front leg. Seeing Akani's look, Kai had a premonition that his coin pouch would endure a tribulation soon. Ashley and Kai kept silent as they looked on in wonder. The fox finished reading the menu shortly after. Looking up, she noticed the two had been staring at her. Instead of looking embarrassed, Akan patted her paw against her closed menu, signaled the two to look at theirs. "I didn't know she could read." Ashley appeared at a loss. Kai did the only thing he could think of, shrugged. He had no idea either if he was being honest. They shared a look of bemusement before they opened their own menus. Menu opened. Kai's eyes bulged out. What caught his eye first was the prices. Kai could feed himself for a month for the prices of one of these meals, maybe even multiple months, with some food items being obscenely expensive. He sneakily glanced at Aani, who was still drooling with her eyes closed, likely imagining all the delicious food she was about to eat. There were quite a few exotic dishes that he had never heard of, including slime cores and flying snake. He didn't know what slime cores were, but it sounded disgusting. A waiter appeared shortly, taking their order. The woman didn't even blink when Aani began pointing to different items across the menu. She would repeat them aloud, looking for confirmation from Aani that it was the food item she wanted. Kai's heart sank with every additional item added. Ashley looked amused more than anything. They hadn't discussed how they would pay, but Kai would pay for all three of them, although this was not a date. The warden had given him one of the coin pouches belonged to the men he arrested. He hadn't checked the contents yet, but was positive he would be able to afford this meal, he hoped. Kai remained quiet, waiting for Ashley to speak first. He was a little uncomfortable with the situation, but was doing his best to remain in control. Ashley stared at the young man before her. He was an enigma she couldn't quite put her finger on. Most of the time he was broody, observant, and quiet, while at other times he could be expressive or cheery when he was with what few friends he had. Unfortunately, his guard was up as he quietly observed her now. Her usual tricks didn't work on the young man. She knew she looked breathtaking. If the number of guys and girls turning their heads as she walked by was any way to gauge it, she was looking quite eye-catching today. Her sundress showed a bit of skin, just enough to give rise to the imagination of those hopeful, lusty few. Her counterpart looked quite different from her. His tunic was plain and looked cheaply made. Very out of place for a restaurant like this, but he wore it without a care, seemingly ignoring all the stares he received walking in. It made her curious how he could afford the school's tuition. It was expensive for sure, but not so much that nobility throughout the kingdom couldn't afford it. She hadn't found out anything about his family, despite her digging. A mysterious father who vanished as quickly as he appeared. His transcripts stated he was from a kitsune village, a place no one had any clue about the location. The only certainty she could dig up was that his brother had attended the academy 8 years prior and had performed exceptionally well for a commoner with little to no background, catching the attention of many nobilities throughout the kingdom. The family was filled with secrets for sure. Strangely, she had come to like Kai, perhaps even more than she thought. It was odd to meet someone who didn't lust after her or try to get closer to her because of her grandfather's power. Now the question was, What did he think of her? She sent him a disarming smile. Nothing. His striking blue eyes didn't even blink. How are the boots doing? She questioned, trying to get him to open up or even smile. Good, he responded without changing his expression. Ashley pouted. You're not a fun date. This is not a date, he repeated with a hint of amusement. You know most people would kill to be in your position, she said, pointing a finger at him. I'm sure we passed a few dozen that thought about it. A joke that's a good sign. You choose me, he said suddenly. His were eyes playful, but his words held other meanings. It was an accusation. Ashley stretched her arms in front of her, the sundress shifting with her movement. Hey, meeting you today was purely coincidental. That's not what I meant, and you know it, he accused. His eyes dipped low for a split second before returning to her eyes. Her eyes bored into his. Ah, Kai. I caught you there. His cheeks pinked for a few seconds, knowing he had been caught. Maybe you're not as resistant to my charm as I thought, she winked at him. He scowled. Why'd you do it? Do what? She kept playing the game of cat and mouse with him. He sighed. Would it kill you to be upfront with me? I want to know why you singled me out at the beginning of the year. Would you believe me if I said it was because you're different than the others? Something passed through his eyes. She wasn't sure if she liked it or not. Deciding she wouldn't tell him the truth, she couldn't. But maybe he would accept a different answer. As you know, I'm Soul Mage, she waited for him to nod. One of the abilities I received when I got my magic is called Soul Vision. It is exactly as it sounds. I can see people's souls. Makes for finding monsters or people easy. Although there are ways to hide or disguise it from what I've been told. In any case, while playing around in melee tactics, to my astonishment, your soul was different than all the other students. Kai was frozen, wide eyes staring at her. There was even a little bit of fear in his eyes. Does she mean soul presence? Can she tell my soul doesn't match someone in the Foundation realm? It wasn't something he had often thought about, but Soul Presence 4 had been the only skill to transfer over from his old life. After half a minute, he finally spoke. Different how? Ashley shook her head. Nope, I already shared one secret, now it's your turn. A secret, he mumbled. He looked thoughtful. His eyes turned to Aani ever so slightly before looking up. A hint of anger passed through his eyes before it vanished. Fine. I have a life and death enmity with someone, he said simply. Ashley's eyes widened. What? She half yelled. She covered her mouth and looked around, but then remembered the enchantments were in place to block the sound going outside of the room. A knock on the enchanted doors halted further questions. A second later they opened, revealing a few waiters bringing trays of food in, placing them on the table. Both Ashley and Kai each had one plate placed in front of them, while Aani had 8. There were stars in her eyes. A small puddle of drool had fallen onto the floor below as she stared blatant like a ravenous beast that hasn't eaten in weeks. Only Ashley was pretty sure the little monster ate this morning, as she caused a commotion as she always does at the cafeteria. Students had begun betting on how much the little fox would eat during a single meal. Ashley stealthily activated her soul vision, making her eyes glow lightly. She peered at the unusual fox, examining her soul. In the center of the fox's chest, a small white vaporous orb sat there. Ordinary would be the way to describe it. All souls were different in size, shape, and color, but the most commonly seen were white orbs. The only true difference in souls was their strength or presence, which was dependent on their magical realm. Basically, Aani's soul looked like the generic version of a Foundation realm individual. Pausing in her eating for a moment, Aani looked into her eyes. The fox gave her a toothy smile before she resumed her gluttonous feast. It was the knowing smirk that set Ashley's chest cold. She put it out of her mind for the moment as she peeked at Kai, who had settled down, eating as he sent occasionally horrified glances at the fox. Breaking the silence now that the staff had left, who is it you have a life and death grudge with? She was too curious not to ask. He looked at her oddly. I won't tell you. I promise I won't tell, she said sweetly, giving her best puppy dog look that always worked on her grandfather. She really wanted to know. He just shook his head, determined. She sighed, giving up. Stubborn was the first thought that came to her mind. Not that she blamed him, giving up secrets about yourself was no easy task, even with someone you trust or loved, let alone a stranger. Despite her attempts to grow closer, Kai remained vigilant of her. No, more like he's just determined and obstinate. Maybe I came on too strong when we first met. Are you sure you're not a noble? Sometimes you are so dreadfully dull like them. Kai gave her a deadpanned stare. I'm not always like this. When I'm around my family or friends, I'm able to relax more. When I'm around you, I feel my guard come up. Perhaps it's because you want something. He was giving her a chance to spill the beans. Ashley coughed lightly, choking a little on her food. Well, it's not like I was subtle, I suppose. You know, I'm not technically a noble either, she said, changing the subject. I'm aware of your status, he said. His eyes flicked with amusement, obviously not missing the fact that she changed the subject. Well, just like the nobility of this kingdom, my status is only good here in the Ashbourne kingdom. Outside, in a different kingdom, empire, state, whatever, it means nothing. As other places don't do this backwards feudal system, the only thing that remains the same is that I have a powerful, influential grandfather. You know it works like that for most nobles. Their raised status doesn't mean jack elsewhere. Ashley wilted. That's not what I meant, she muttered. I get it. Are you trying to say that we aren't so different? He said flatly. Yes, she said excitedly. He gets it after all. No, we're quite different, Ashley, he refuted. Gosh, why is it so hard talking to him? She squeezed her eyes, a small headache forming. What I was trying to say, she emphasized, is that I will be leaving the Ashbourne kingdom for good shortly. Why? When? He asked, his eyes widened in surprise. Tomorrow. She looked down to her plate. My grandfather has finally concluded his business here. I'll no longer be enjoying special privileges anymore. She pointed her fork at him, so I won't be there to save you either. Honestly, that is unexpected news. He appeared contemplative, maybe even concerned. Does he actually care about me? Or is this all just faux sentiments? Tell me about it. I was only informed a few days ago, she mumbled grumpily. Where will you be going? He asked. Titan Prime. I don't know the specifics yet, but I'll be going to one of the Prime academies there. Kai perked up at that. Congratulations, he said. You don't look happy about it, though, he pointed out. Ashley couldn't help it. It was such a sudden decision, and her grandfather wouldn't change his mind. Her eyes were filled with unshed tears. She had many friends in this kingdom, people she had known her entire life. Perhaps I will see you on Titan Prime then, Kai said, making her head shoot up. What do you mean? He looked uncomfortable. Don't go spreading this around. I haven't told anyone else yet. But if I'm able to win first place in the end-of-year tournament, my father will help me attend school at the Prime Academies. Ashley gave him a critical look over. Human, Foundation level 46. He was nearly 80 levels below Nicholas and 60-70 levels below other top students. The fact that they had their birthdays earlier and thus had access to magic and were likely handheld or fed their levels until school started was a severe advantage for those students. The power of additional stats, levels, and skills could not be discounted even with the rumor of Kai's tenacity in battle. Underneath his composure, there was a level of competitiveness even she admired. Her contacts told her that the enigmatic Kai could be seen training well into most evenings and with unending determination. Now that he admitted he had a life-and-death grudge, it made sense why he would train so much. She wondered how Kai's father would even be able to afford school there, but that just added to his mystery. Ashley smiled. I hope to see you on Titan Prime then. He toasted her, taking a sip of his water. As if on cue, the little fox decided to unleash a belch of epic proportion that only a combination of so many different foods could create. Ashley could swear the ground and table vibrated a little. Water flew across the table, spit out like a cannon, as Kai could no longer contain his himself as he roared with laughter. Ashley as well nearly rolled out of her seat, laughing at the pair. The situation calmed down shortly after, the two having a dessert, while Aani opted out of eating any to Kai's visible relief. When it came time to pay, Ashley was prepared to pay it all since she was the one who invited the two out. To her disbelief and Kai's complete shock, Aani made coins appear in front of her, the exact amount with tip for the staff. Snatching the fox, Kai began shaking her like a piggy bank. "Where are you keeping these coins? You know how much money I've spent on your food." Chapter 35. The Fourth Expedition. The students began converging into their respective groups outside the forest they had visited on their first field expedition. Dark, ominous mountains stood tall in the background nearby. The air held a tinge of sulfur as Kai inhaled deeply. Everyone was looking at him, or more specifically his new armor. Ethereal wisps began moving around the dull white Alder-light armor. Gradually the somewhat heavy armor lightened as it began absorbing what little sunlight made its way through the dark clouds overhead. Its ethereal wisps were dim, as the light it took in was not enough to make a significant difference. This would be his first time using the armor. He didn't have time to test its resilience and durability in an environment outside Nock's smithy. Under his dull white armor, he wore a black long-sleeved shirt and pants made of lightweight fabric that was also tear-resistant. The contrast with the black clothing under the white armor looked quite catching in his opinion. Maybe too eye-catching, as he received many stares. His thoughts went back to his not-a-date dinner yesterday with Ashley. True to her word, she did not show up at the academy today or the field expedition, causing a wave of rumors spreading already, some accurate, others less so. He had surprisingly enjoyed his evening with her, finding her intelligence and boldness refreshing, if not a little troubling at times. Perhaps he could have seen himself becoming friends if they had more time and she wasn't hiding something from him. Not that finding out what it was might change their relationship. He wasn't sure if he could ever truly trust anyone outside his family ever again. The betrayal of Lucian was still fresh in his mind and heart, even after 16 years in this life. The end of the date had been anticlimactic. After dinner, Ashley claimed to have to report to the palace to conclude some final business before she left for good. Attempting to be a gentleman, Kai offered to walk her to the palace, but she declined, claiming her mysterious bodyguard was capable of escorting her there. At Ashley's behest, they did share a quick hug, to which Kai was given a stern warning when an aura was projected at him by what he assumed was her secret bodyguard. When he had returned home, he checked his coins. To his utter confusion, all of his coins were accounted for, begging the question of where Akan had found the coins and where had she been storing it. Approaching the group, he received different kinds of stares, all filled with envy, jealousy, and curiosity. Then there was the odd emotion of anger he sensed from Jason. Clearly, the Marquess heir did not appreciate Kai flaunting his new armor. Uncaring, Kai focused on the instructor who stood impatiently waiting for all the students to gather. "We will be heading deeper into the forest today. The area this group is planning to visit is about a 20-minute walk into the forest," the instructor informed the group. The group proceeded to walk through the woods. He marched next to Hector, his most reliable companion in this dysfunctional group. Even on their fourth trip, Group 2 had not formed cohesive teamwork. Instead, the 9 individuals were split into 3 different groups. His only saving grace was the policy of allowing one group to be without protection had been squashed. But it didn't mean he was going to let his guard down and rely on the instructor. The man in Kai's eyes had proven himself unreliable. 4 of the students with the lowest levels had chosen to stay together. They had the most varied group, with the only healer, a tank of sorts, and 2 other mages. Kai couldn't see himself fighting with these novices. They still hadn't proven to him they were worth relying on, especially after that Vine incident. The second group was composed of Kai's current arch-nemesis, Jason, and his 2 goons. While more competent than the first group, Kai simply couldn't trust them to have his back. Jason had shown his true colors early on. The man was not above petty revenge and wouldn't hesitate to hurt Kai if the opportunity came to him. Then there was Kai's group, or more accurately, Kai and Hector. Hector had remained a good, reliable companion throughout all of their expeditions. The man engaged their enemies from afar, while Kai took the Vanguard position. Jason's group had attempted to recruit Hector, the second highest level person of Group 2, as of present, but he had refused them, to Kai's undeniable glee. Perhaps I'm being petty, but fuck Jason. The Marquess heir hadn't really bothered him much since after the first expedition, but it was easy enough to tell that the guy still hated him for whatever reason he justified in his mind. It had become a competition between the groups to secure the most kills. Jason's group aggressively pushed their way every time. During the last few trips, they had undoubtedly grown the most out of the rest of the people present. Jason even went as far as to have one of his goons physically block Kai twice, and without ranged damage, he simply couldn't do anything. "Beasts ahead," the instructor called out helpfully. Rushing ahead, Jason and his two goons charged through the brush out of vision where fighting began. Still hungry for levels. After the first expedition, a spark had been lit under the noble's ass, prompting him to rush for levels. He had gained an impressive amount since. Kai suspected he had been taking additional trips under the supervision of his family to gain levels so that he could have a better showing at the final tournament. Jason had reached the forging realm only a week ago, bringing about a wave of incessant bragging. Kai couldn't deny at times he wanted to venture out alone one day and gain levels or hire a higher-leveled person to watch over him while he fought out here. But both answers were dangerous. On one hand, he would be without protection or a safety net if he met something beyond his capabilities if he was alone. On the other, he couldn't trust strangers with no vested interest besides gold to watch over him. Here at the academy, despite that bullshit from the first expedition, it was in their best interest to keep the students alive. Kai had heard of backlash from the first expedition, but no changed results had come from it yet. He could find and ask his brother, assuming he was still in the capital, but he had not heard from him since the first day he arrived in Verdia. He wasn't even sure where to begin looking, assuming his brother would even help him to power level in the first place, which he highly doubted the more he thought about it. Kai let out a depressing sigh. Walking through the thicket, the sounds of battle had ended. Slaughtered indiscriminately, a few tiny horned four-legged beasts lay separated in pieces on the bloody grass. Jason stood above one, a wicked smile on his face as he cleaned his sword with a cloth from his spatial ring. Hector and Kai shared a look. Not caring to hide his voice, Jason spoke up. "It's a pity, you know, armor-like that is wasted on commoner trash like you. And here he goes. I thought I might actually have a pleasant day. I'm older. I need to be the bigger person. Just ignore him." Seeing Kai unresponsive to the taunting, Jason continued, "Perhaps it was your sister this time that opened her legs." "Okay, fuck that. Actually, it was your mother. Payment for services rendered," he shot back. A collective gasp went through the group. Ever the wise person, Hector took a step back away from Kai. Shit. Why am I so impulsive sometimes? It was too late to take it back, and he knew an apology wouldn't mean shit. Not that Jason deserved it when he started this scene. A shadow passed over Jason's face. His eyes of contempt turned dark with promise. He slowly marched towards Kai, his sword trembling. Body tense, Kai bent his knees slightly ready to react to the seething noble. A massive object struck the earth between the two, flinging dirt and dust everywhere. "Enough," roared the instructor. He wheeled onto Jason. "If you can't take it, then don't star." Shaking the likes that Kai had never experienced before, flung him to the ground. A symphony of cracks echoed throughout the forest as some trees began collapsing one after another. Everyone except the instructor was on their knees, having been taken to the ground by the powerful shaking. Another crack set off near Kai's head. Leaves and branches started falling. As if in slow motion, one of the trees started falling towards the group, a few people in its path of destruction. Standing between the students, the burly instructor reached up towards the falling tree. With heroic might, he caught the tree on its descent, his feet digging into the ground as he held its weight up alone. "Move," he breathlessly exhaled out. His face was turning redder with each passing moment. His arms were trembling, or perhaps it was the ground shaking him. With difficulty, Kai and the others were able to crawl out of the way before the instructor dropped the tree to his side. Falling to his hands and knees, he looked nearly broken. Ragged gasps of air filled the instructor, his chest moving up and down rapidly. To the relief of everyone, the earthquake tempered off until it finally stopped completely a minute later. A single thunderous roar echoed through the forest, making Kai and others cover their ears. It wasn't sound magic, it was simply so loud that it was physically painful to hear. "Report, is everyone okay?" Kai looked around and could see every student standing now the shaking had dissipated. Everyone looked shaken but unharmed. "We're all good," one of the girls answered. The instructor nodded. Groaning, he stood to his feet. "We need to leave immediately. Let's head back to the staging area." Everyone began walking back, cautiously looking around. What was that? An earthquake. But it was so powerful. We must be closer to its source. What about that roar? It was terrifying. Kai could hear students whispering between each other in conversation as they followed the instructor back to where they began their trip. In the next few moments, something strange happened. 1 second, he could hear the usual sounds of forest life, the next nothing. All sounds ceasing, Kai froze as a cold shiver ran down his spine. A premonition. Something had changed, the atmosphere had become unsettling. The instructor had noticed something too. Freezing in his tracks, he concentrated on something unseen in the distance behind them. Kai was beginning to feel something now, a vibration in the ground, barely noticeable but still there. Not an earthquake but sporadic. Like running. "Run!" the instructor screamed with panic. All kinds of sounds rang out around the forest. Beyond his vision, something roared fiercely, growing louder and louder with every passing second as it drew closer. As if the spell had been broken, the silent forest had come alive. Something had stirred all the beasts and animals. Chaos ensued. All the students began screaming as they ran in the direction that they had been walking a moment ago, but it was too late. A tree trunk came flying from outside his vision, crashing into one student in front of him. Turning to the source, he saw a brown-furred, four-legged monster with overly huge paws come crashing into the midst of the students. Spikes and rocks seemed molded across its entire body in patches. Easily 3 times the size of the burly instructor, its presence brought everyone to a shocking halt. Even Jason sat flat on his ass, trembling as he stared at the large creature towering overhead, his lips quivering in fear. Kai felt his hands shake. He knew this monster was obscenely powerful. The monster's mouth unhinged in a roar, 2 large fangs hanging down. First, to react, the instructor launched towards the monster, blue crystal angular armor encasing his body. The monster showed no mercy. Its giant paw batted into the instructor, smacking him through the air until he crashed into one of the fallen trees and ricocheted into the air beyond the branches. Kai could see sharp spiked crystals sticking out of the monster's paw, but it was uncaring. Spiked earth bear. Within seconds, the instructor was back. Blue crystal platforms materializing in mid-air as he jumped to each one, going faster and faster as new ones spawned. Pushing off the last one, he rocketed towards the monster. In his hand was a jagged edge blue crystal sword. He slammed straight into the beast's back, a roar accompanying the terrific explosion of dirt and debris. Finally regaining his senses, Kai had seen enough as he started running. He dashed to the side. The fighting between the instructor and the monster had blocked the route back. Behind him, he heard one of the female students scream before being abruptly silenced. More sounds rang out until the sound of his instructor screaming pulled his attention. Twisting his head back, he saw the instructor pinned underneath the giant paw of the monster. Dozens of crystal pillars shot out of the ground at angles, all colliding with the beast. The rocks across its back seemed to spread out over its once brown fur, causing the crystals to shatter against the beast's armor. Unable to move, the instructor's face turned to terror as the creature brought its unhinging mouth closer. Panicking, the instructor struggled to no avail. His arms were pinned. Kai pitied the man. His screams of agony and fear resounded throughout the forest. Still running, Kai watched, nearly dazed, as the monster bit down on the head of his once group instructor and protector. A cruel silence overtook the once loud battle. The silence was again replaced by the sound of one of the students screaming in anguish and terror from nearby. He didn't stop or turn around as he kept running for his life. Chapter 36. Bees and Shadows. Kai could no longer hear the screams of his classmates. In fact, he could no longer hear any human cries. Instead, the unnerving sound of monsters paraded all around him. In his panic, he had run as fast as he could for minutes, uncaring where, as long as it was away from that thing. Now he was lost. Stopping, he twirled around, looking for where to go next. The problem was that the entire forest looked similar. There weren't any distinguishing details to help guide his way. That thing shouldn't exist in this forest. His path to his current location hadn't been a straight path, as he tried avoiding any sounds he heard, ultimately leading to him losing his sense of direction. He wasn't even sure he could find his way back to where the monster had been if he tried, not that he would. His heartbeat was returning to normal, but he stayed alert. I need to get out of this damn forest. A new sound entered his ears, closer than all the other noises in the lively forest. Crouching, he hid in the thick grass nearby. Right now, Kai hated his armor. He stuck out like a sore thumb, the white was like a lamp against the brown and green backdrop. Silently, he pulled his sword out, as the sound grew louder. There is it. With eyes of black ink and a green and yellow body lined with dark hair, the creature flew its way out from the shadows. Kai gawked at the massive stinger pulsing out of the back end of the insectoid, its length near his own forearm. Transparent wings moved at speeds Kai could not see as they vibrated rapidly through the air, slowly carrying the insect. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 10, 28. 28 massive insects. All their bodies were larger than Aani. Green secretions dripped from their stingers, which occasionally dropped across leaves and tree branches. He heard a dreaded sizzle sound as he watched the leaves dissolve into nothing and the bark melt away. Behemoth B, Foundation Level 75. Behemoth B, Foundation Level 72. He recognized them. They were a local monster that had been discussed in his monster subjugation class. They were literally monster-sized bees that weighed as much as the average 10-year-old child. I have too many exposed areas not protected by my armor. I can't risk getting stung or having that drip on me. Think, damn it. What did they say in class? Heavy? Yes. Acid? Check. The easiest way to deal with them is to make them slower or keep them at a distance since they possess no ranged attacks. His gravity could definitely do that. Remaining frozen, Kai was ready at a moment's notice to activate his magic. They flitted around the area randomly. He saw a branch dip lightly as one bee landed on top of it. The buzzing was getting annoying. The entire area was filled with noise, making it difficult to hear anything else. Above him, he heard the dreaded sound of buzzing coming closer. Moving his eyes, he watched the bee pass him by overhead and then land on the ground 2 meters in front of him. He observed the curious bee dig into the ground and then move to another spot before digging once again. It jumped back into the air and hovered in place, looking around with its back to Kai. It's looking for something. Distracted, he felt something heavy land on his armored back. He hadn't realized a bee had come from behind him. There was too much noise in the area to properly hear it. He should have been paying attention. It was a new flaw of his that he realized now he had been too reliant on his blood presence ability in his first life. His observational skills were lacking. Through the back of his chest piece, Kai felt something scrap across his armor. With it came the noise of a knife on a whetstone, only more metallic in nature. The stinger, he realized with wide eyes. The bee was shooting its stinger out, grinding against his armor, then dragging it back as it retracted it. For a moment he wondered if the bee was simply just sitting on him, and the scrapping was a mere coincidence. Turning around, he saw the bee in front of him. All the black eyes were locked on him. Pushing off, he felt the bee slide off his back by his unexpected movement. Kai lunged at the hovering bee in front of him, quickly sliding his sword through the underside of its body. It effortlessly passed through, until the tip of the blade popped out of the top. Immediately, he heard a ding, signaling the quick death of the bee. Grunting, the weight of the bee fell on his sword and hand, its body entirely pinned lifelessly on the blade. He spun around, twirling his blade in a horizontal slash, triggering heavy blow towards the bee that had once been resting on him. Either stunned or reacting too slow, his blade quickly arced into it, but instead of cutting it, his sword had turned into a club. The massive dead weight of the bee on his sword crashed into its once friend and caused it to go soaring into the air until it splattered against a tree. A ding came a moment later. The skewered bee slid down his blade and off, its momentum arcing it through the air out of sight as it tumbled into the grass. Whipping the blade downwards, the pale yellow blood fluid splattered against the grass. Exposed where he stood, the other 26 bees all began flying towards him from all directions. Free of the bee's encumbering weight, Kai activated Domain. The weight of all surrounding monsters and objects alike increased 100%, including himself. With the burden of Kai's ability, the bees began falling like rocks to the ground, a thump encompassing each one's impact. Grinning viciously, Kai watched the slow bees struggle to move. Their wings feebly fluttered as they remained firmly on the ground. They couldn't even walk away. Their legs were too weak to lift them under their newfound weight. The forest shifted under the pressure, but remained firm. His gravity only dragged a few leaves off the trees. Cautiously, Kai inched his way forward towards the downed bees. They were very much still alive, just unable to move under their massive weight thanks to his gravity magic. He approached the first, staying away from the stinger in case it was baiting him in, as unlikely as that was. Stabbing down, Kai struck the immobile bee right in the center of its head. The ding resounded once more. Satisfied, he moved on. A minute later they all lay dead, yellow slime trickling out of their stab wounds. You have slain Behemoth Bee, Foundation Level 63. You have slain Behemoth Bee, Foundation Level 75. You have slain Behemoth Bee, Foundation Level 71. Vanguard has reached Foundation Level 47. Vanguard has reached Foundation Level 59. 13 levels. Kai beamed. Finally, some proper levels. I need to find more of those. The only problem was diminishing returns. Kill too many of the same enemy, and your experience began to slow down. The same goes if you kill enemies too weak to pose a challenge. His experience would be like pebbles trying to fill a large pit. It would probably take thousands to get to the forging realm if he kept killing behemoth bees, considering how easy they turned out to kill. His gravity magic was uniquely suited for countering this particular type of monster. Health, 840, 840. Stamina, 327, 350. Mana, 1d92, 350. Checking his status, he saw that only his mana had suffered so far. Domain was a very mana-exhaustive spell, draining it quickly the longer he kept it going. Thankfully, his primary active skill, Heavy Blow, was the least mana-intensive out of all of his available skills. Unspent attributes available, 65. And there it is. His grin would be infectious if anyone had been around to see it. Now it was time to quickly decide where to place his attributes. The obvious choice was more mana. He was running low, and it would take a few hours to recover it too fully. Only the gods knew how long he would be stuck in this dreadful forest. With 65 attributes available, he put nearly half into his wisdom, bringing it up to 65. It was obvious where he was going to place the rest of his attributes. Vitality, strength, and intelligence seemed to be the staple of his class at the current time, and right now they would benefit him more than endurance and dexterity. Although I need to keep my speed and reaction up or I'll be in trouble. With a thought, he finished placing his attributes. Vitality, 90, 94. Strength, 70. Dexterity, 35. Endurance, 35. Intelligence, 60. Wisdom, 65. Health, 940, 940. Stamina, 350, see 350. Mana, 650, 650. Not a bad start, he nodded to himself. His build was beginning to take shape. Now to get out of this forest. Suppressing a groan, he looked around once again. He had forgotten that everything looked the same. He wasn't a scout, capable of finding clues or tracks out of the forest. Everywhere around appeared like more of the same. Rays of dim light came through the thick canopy in patches, giving light to some areas of the forest while most of it remained dim and shadowed. Perhaps it was his eyes playing tricks on him, but he could have sworn he saw a shadow move in the distance. It was unsettling enough to give him the chills. Stepping away, he avoided the bodies of the bees as he moved on in the opposite direction of the weird shadows. After about 15 meters, he heard a sound he shouldn't have. A familiar bark. Aani. Sprinting back, an odd sight greeted him. Instead of a single gluttonous fox, a skulk of foxes cluttered the area where he had been a few moments ago. Instead of the common red and orange coats he was used to seeing, they were shades of black. Some ravenously tore apart the bees' corpses, while others lapped up at the yellow ooze. Realization dawned on Kai. They had smelled the sweet scent and had been lured to the bodies. Hiding behind one of the trees, he peeked his head out at the scene. There were even more foxes than there had been bees. How many more was difficult to say. It was somewhere between 30 to 40, but it was difficult to discern. The foxes vanished into the shadows and reappeared randomly throughout the area from another shadow, assuming it was the same fox. There were even a few juvenile foxes taking cues from the older ones who were teaching their young. Shadow Fox, Foundation Level 81. Kai was a little awed. That one was a higher level than Aani, who to his knowledge was the highest leveled fox in Kitsune village. Kai continued to watch. They were cute, but definitely wilder than the foxes he grew up with. A pang of homesickness hit him as he looked on. The situation was not too different than dinner at Kitsune village. Looking over all the foxes, they averaged a higher level than the ones in his village. Perhaps that was because the ones in the village were domesticated and lazy, while these were obviously wild foxes that fought, killed, and scavenged for survival, unlike the pampered, spoiled, lazy little gluttonous creatures that he lived with. Yap, twisting his head to the source of the noise, sitting on the ground behind him, a fox regarded him. Orange eyes illuminated in the darkness, the left half of its body sheathed in shadows, almost vanishing entirely out of sight. The fox stared at him inquisitively, tilting its head as it stared into his eyes. Crouching, Kai's hand reached out of its own accord towards the sitting fox. Flinching ever so slightly, the fox looked ready to run at a moment's notice. Keeping his hand steady and slow, he kept eye contact with the fox. "Good ye, boy." Kai looked down, seeing the telltale sign of its anatomy. "You're so adorable." His voice went up an octave, trying not to scare the cute fox. He didn't know why he was trying to pet a wild fox, but he felt that if he ran, it might attract their attention in a bad way. Perhaps he could make friends with the fox, or even just show that he wasn't an enemy, or better yet, food. Now that the fox was closer, he closely examined it. Unlike Aani, whose exquisite coat ranged in color depending on where you looked at her body, the one before him was entirely black in color. It wasn't hard to guess the dark coat helped camouflage it against predators, and likewise helped it ambush prey throughout the creepy forest. Kai could perceive curiosity in its eyes, but not the telltale sign of intelligence he saw in his village's foxes. His hand hovered until it was a finger's length from the fox's face, ready to react if it tried to bite him. By holding out his hand, the fox would hopefully smell him and take in his scent, and then see that he was neither food nor enemy. Taking the bait, the fox leaned forwards until it began sniffing his hand. The reaction was so violent that Kai almost attacked because he was startled. Reeling back, the fox backpedaled its little body until its butt hit another tree, unable to go back any further. Even under the cover of darkness in the shadows, Kai could perceive the shaking of the shadows. Something had startled the little fox to the point where its fight or flight survival instincts stopped working. Kai watched shocked, unsure of what to do next. Peeking back at the others, the fox's reaction had not gone unnoticed. They now surrounded him in a loose circle. Kai felt his back drip nervously with sweat. Keeping his back to the tree, he tried to look for an obvious weakness in their circle. He watched as they studied him. A few had their teeth bared. "Please don't. I don't want to fight you guys," he said. His body was tense and ready to run at a moment's notice. There was absolutely no way he could fight so many monsters at once, unless his gravity worked on them like it did the bees, which he doubted. "I like foxes, even the lazy ones." They closed in, tightening the circle until they stopped a few meters away. A yap came from behind him, the same sound as from before. It drew the attention of the others. A series of yaps followed. Kai couldn't even guess what was happening or being said. This behavior was totally unlike anything he was used to. Suddenly all the foxes turned and ran off into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind the half-eaten bodies of the behemoth bees. They disappeared quickly until he couldn't tell them apart from the shadows in the distance. What the fuck was that? I'm so done with this place. Chapter 37, Slimes. Shit, I'm lost. His first clue should have been the increasing humidity and temperature. It was expected as morning turned to midday, but he was certain that wasn't the case in this situation. The more Kai trekked, the darker the already dim forest became. Above him, little patches and holes in the forest canopy showed that the overcast sky had become gloomier. The dismal weather led him to the conclusion that he was either heading in the wrong way direction toward the volcanic Ashbourne Mountains, or a storm was coming. Neither boded well for him. His second clue came after walking for half an hour. He was still stuck in the blasted forest. The scenery of bark, shrubs, and grass was unending. No matter how long he walked, he couldn't escape the woods. Either the entire forest looked the same, or he was trapped in an illusion. He was aware that he possessed an orientation problem, but this was getting out of hand. Directionally challenged is what his mother called him. At least in the past, as Ben, he could fly and find his way. Now he was stuck and lost, like one of those beginners he used to look down upon. His only solace was that the forest had calmed down. Either that, or he had walked far enough away from where the action was happening. The sound of flowing water broke him out of his musing. Marching right up to the source of the sound, he found a stream no wider than his height across, flowing gently down to wherever water goes. Tearing off his helmet, Kai's slick hair stuck to his head. The humidity was doing him no favors as he was drenched with sweat. He dropped the helmet with a dull thud before falling to his knees next to the stream. Cupping his hands together, he gathered water into them before bringing it up to his mouth and taking a sip. The water had a slight tinge of acidity, but seemed drinkable. After getting his fill, he splashed his face and head with the water. He wanted to wash his sweaty body and underclothes, but he wasn't about to remove his armor to wash up. The water helped, but Kai still found himself tired. Physically, he was fine. Looking at his resources, his mana and stamina were almost back to full. The toll of being on guard the entire time was wearing him down mentally. His goal was to get out of this forest before sundown. Without any sensory skills, he would be completely at the mercy of any monsters he encountered. Just thinking about being stuck in the forest during the night was causing his anxiety to rise. With the thick canopy and overcast sky, he couldn't even determine in which direction he was heading. He was lost, and though he would never admit it aloud, he was scared. Thinking his choices over, he considered his few options. He could follow the water upstream or downstream, praying it led out of the forest. The other, probably smarter option would be to climb one of the massive trees and look for the general direction of civilization. Looking up, branch after branch loomed over him as it stretched out, creating a multi-layered canopy. With no other recourse, he set his sword back in his sheath and started the climb. The task of climbing had not been as easy as he had anticipated. His armor's weight made it a grueling task even with his enhanced strength. Gone was the special trait of his armor, the thick branches overhead and dreary overcast sky, making sure no sunlight ever touched it. Peering down from near the top, Kai's stomach somersaulted a little. A fall from this height would spell his end. That was only if he was lucky. If he was unlucky, he would end up breaking a lot of bones crashing from branch to branch on his way down, which would result in him either bleeding out or dying of thirst if he couldn't move. Although he had one weak health potion on him, the weak version didn't heal broken bones very well, and certainly wouldn't be able to handle many broken bones at once. That was assuming the vial didn't break on the way down. After reaching nearly 30 meters high, he balanced himself as he peeked his head above the final canopy. Overhead, turbulent clouds hung, swirling visibly as he watched them. To his front, he could see the ever-imposing Ashbourne Mountains, closer than ever. He was still kilometers away, but the daunting mountains towered in the distance, rising into the thick grey clouds and out of sight. Smoke bellowed from beyond the ridge, traveling up into the clouds to where Kai assumed smoke met clouds. Well, that's obviously not the right way, Kai sarcastically thought. The other direction was green until it appeared to taper off, hopefully leading to the edge of this forsaken forest. To his left and right, all he saw was more green. With an idea of where to go now, he could see he had been walking towards the mountains this entire time. Ha! I really screwed up. At this point, he didn't even care about finding the staging area from where they started the expedition. His priority was to get out of this forest. He just wasn't at a level where he could traverse the area safely without help. He had been lucky so far, but that could change at any moment. Back on the ground, Kai noticed the direction of the stream, which flowed towards where he had seen the edge of the forest. A coincidence? Maybe. But it wasn't one he was going to question. He began walking alongside the stream for 5 minutes, enjoying the sound of the gentle running water. It was then he noticed something peculiar about the forest floor. It looked like the grass had been trimmed down to practically nothing. What was most odd was the patterns that the trimmed grass appeared. It was as if someone had trimmed multiple half-meter-wide trails straight through the forest, with some intersecting pathways. Crawling forwards at a slower pace, Kai finally found the culprit. Slime, Foundation Level 71. Slime, Foundation Level 62. Slime, Foundation Level 66. Kai couldn't correctly estimate the number of slimes. The group of them meandered all around. Keeping his distance, Kai watched the transparent gelatinous balls of fluid move around, slowly consuming the things around them. At their center, he could see a pure black core, not a perfect sphere, but round in nature. Strangely enough, it didn't seem to possess eyes, ears, or a mouth. The restaurant at which he had been with Ashley had slime cores on their menu, so he assumed they were some kind of exotic delicacy. So this is a slime. The restaurant had been the first time he had heard of such creatures. They didn't look appetizing if he was being honest. He watched on with fascination as grass entered the underside of the slime, only for the strands to then be spun around, much like a whirlpool inside of the transparent body. Slowly the grass was dissolved until nothing was left, leading the slime to move to the next patch of grass. It was completely silent as it moved on from one section of grass to the next. After 10 minutes of watching the scene of slimes eating grass, he decided they would be his next target. The slimes either lacked awareness and hadn't noticed him, or simply didn't care, as they continued their unending feeding. They were basically free experience, seeing how slow and vulnerable they appeared. How could he pass up such an opportunity? Better the weird slimes than the cute shadow foxes he had seen earlier. There was simply no point in planning how he would attack. With his limited knowledge about the slimes, he had no clue what offensive and defensive abilities they possessed. The slimes were too spread out for his domain skill. He decided it would be the perfect time to use his gravity pillar skill. It had seemed tailor-made for such slow-moving creatures. Quietly walking up to the nearest one, it continued eating grass, oblivious of his presence behind it. Activating gravity pillar, the gelatinous ball squished down a little under the increased gravity, still rounded but more oval in shape. Unaffected by the increased gravity, the slime started shuffling its way towards Kai, faster than he had seen them move before. Within a second, it had quickly exited his gravity pillar, proving the technique insignificant against the slime. Nearly face-palming, Kai realized that the slimes were malleable. They didn't seem to roll, but slid and inched forwards, so his gravity was having no significant effect on them. While his gravity had been super effective against the behemoth soldier bees, it had no apparent effect against this enemy. Taking a step, Kai slashed down at the incoming slime using heavy blow. The blade sped up under its newfound weight. He felt slight resistance as his sword entered the gelatinous body, its momentum rapidly dying out. Close to the core, the entire top half of his blade had stopped inside the body of the slime. He pushed his blade down, but it went no further. The power of his blade should have been enough to cause severe injury to any beast in the Foundation realm, as long as he was able to land a clean hit. Somehow the body of the slime had negated his attack. He couldn't even tell if the thing was injured. The body of the slime began filling the void where he had slashed through, sealing his sword inside its body. Gripping the handle, Kai lifted his blade up, trying to pull it out of the slime. Instead of his blade being pulled out of the slime's body, the slime came with the sword, as if they had fused together. He whipped his sword back and forth, but the slime persisted on the blade. It didn't slide off like he had thought it would. His eyes went wide as saw the runes and glyphs on his blade flickering. The gentle light would dim before restoring itself, only to dim again. Is this thing eating away at my enchantments? What kind of budget enchantments did you make me, Lydia? Growling, Kai stalked up to the nearest tree and swung his sword horizontally into the massive trunk. His face dropped when he felt his sword rebound. Instead of smashing the slime into a gooey pulp or pushing his blade deeper towards the core, instead it bounced off the tree, the force nearly ripping the sword right out of his hands. Activating his heavy blow, he swung his sword against the tree again. Instead of splattering the tenacious slime, his sword rebounded with an even greater force. After smashing the slime sword into the tree multiple times, he was beginning to grow annoyed. Kai felt his anger rising. The enchantments were barely illuminated inside the slime's body. He watched helplessly as they were clearly being drained and dissolved. Distracted by the growing headache attached to his sword, Kai's left hand began tingling. Looking down, his eyes went wide. His hand was inside another slime that had soundlessly approached him and somehow enveloped his hand up to the bracer without him knowing. Swinging his arm around, the slime remained firmly attached, much like the one on his blade. Its core was about a hand length away from his own, but try as he might, his hand was stuck in the slime's viscous liquid body. The tingling began transforming into something more irritating. With every passing second, his hand progressed from tingling to itchy, to an uncomfortable warmth. Urgency hit Kai as he realized he needed to remove his hand from the slime quickly, or his hand would be eaten away like his enchantments. Dropping his blade, he placed his hand against the side of the slime and pushed against it, hoping to pull out his other hand. Instead of pulling his left hand out, his right hand sunk into the slime's body. Now both his hands were stuck inside the single slime. "Fuck!" he yelled at the top of his lungs, his frustration getting to him. He looked around and saw none of the other slimes nearby were heading his way at the moment. The warmth quickly turned into the feeling of hot coals rubbing against his skin. This little shit is eating away at my skin. With both hands trapped and the pain and his anxiety increasing with every passing second, Kai flailed and pulled his arms away, trying to separate them. His strength was quickly draining from him as he pulled and pulled to no avail. The slime's body had a firm grip on his hands. "Fine, if I can't take my hand out, I'll just push them in deeper." Sprinting over to the nearest tree, he pressed the slime against it and kept pressing. The slime's body turned more oval in shape as he pushed harder against the tree. His muscles trembled as his hand began sliding further into the transparent viscous fluid. Within moments, he could feel his fingertip touch the core. The slime trembled with either fear or gluttonous glee as it continued dissolving his hands. After 30 seconds, his hand grasped the slime's core. It was nearly a perfect fit in the palm of his hand. He hoped crushing it would kill the slime, assuming he could crush it. Squeezing his hand against the hard, cold core, the slime vibrated heavily. Ripples ran across the outside of the slime exterior like waves. He felt the hold on his hands and arms loosen, but he didn't stop squeezing. A crunch reverberated out as his hand closed into a fist, the core crushed into small fragments. "You have slain slime, foundation level 72. Immediately the slime dissolved into a watery liquid as its body fell off his hand into a puddle on the ground. With his hands free, he stared at them. Both were red and blotchy, his left more so than the right. They still felt like they were on fire, the gentle wind stinging against his dissolved skin. His bracer remained unblemished. Its dull white coating was still perfect. His chest thumped with excitement and pain. "If I did not have magic resistance +4, I feel like some of my bones might be visible right now." The other slimes were further away from Kai than before, eating their way through the forest. On the ground nearby, the slime was still confined to the top half of his sword. Gone were the enchantments, no longer illuminated in the dim forest. Anger clouded his mind as he stuck his right hand into the slime attached to his sword. He walked the creature over to the same tree where its comrade had dissolved. He placed the slime against the tree and repeated what he had done before. The sword dropped to the ground as he destroyed the core. Agony ran through his hand as he picked up the sword, his nerve endings exploding due to the contact of the handle on semi-dissolved muscle. The rest of the slimes were a problem. He couldn't risk putting his hand through any more of the dissolving balls of evil incarnate. He still possessed his sword, which, like his bracers, remained unblemished, except for the enchantments that were obviously gone. Thinking on it, he didn't understand why his sword couldn't cut through the slime. Perhaps he simply lacked the strength and momentum to get through their thick, viscous bodies. They had proven harder to deal with than any creature he had fought in this life. If chopping at them doesn't work, then how about stabbing? With the point of impact not as spread out, I should feasibly be able to pierce far enough into the body, reaching its core. It was worth a try. Worst case, the slime gets stuck on his sword again, and he just squishes it against the tree until he reaches in and crushes the core. Stomping over to the nearest slime, Kai stood over the gelatinous ball. Raising his sword above him in both hands, he could swear he saw the slime tremble. His sword came down hard and fast as he used heavy blow, piercing right through the slime's body and into its core. Instantly the creature died, a ding going off inside Kai's mind to reassure the fact. Kai giggled with unrestrained delight. Kai would never speak to anyone about the next few minutes. He went on a massacre, going from slime to slime, stabbing into their cores with a vicious smile on his face the entire time. His hands burned, but it didn't stop him from enjoying his much-deserved revenge. Chapter 38. The Goblin. Vanguard has reached Foundation level 67, only 8 levels. That was so not worth dissolving. The adrenaline and shock were beginning to wear off. The pain in his partially dissolved hands was intensifying. Even with pain tolerance 1, the injuries were near debilitating. He was having enough trouble keeping himself from wincing every time a breeze went by. Staring down at the exposed muscles of his hands, he doubted he would be in any condition to fight once the adrenaline fully wore off. Health, 638-940. Holding his sword up to his face, Kai carefully examined it. After slaying over 30 slimes, his sword was surprisingly still sharp and not dissolved like his hands. Maybe slimes can't dissolve metal that well. Even though his bracer had been partially inside the slime, still looked relatively new. Grunting, he sheathed his sword. With his hands free, he gingerly took out his weak health potion. Just holding it was causing his nerve endings to feel as if they were on fire. He was in luck that the slimes hadn't reached the point where they were dissolving his bones. The weak version of health potions couldn't heal bones well, but it did fine with repairing muscle and skin. Putting the cork between his teeth, he pulled it off and spit it away. He chugged the vial in one gulp. Well, now I just need... Heavy, he moaned so softly he could barely hear himself. He couldn't find his voice or the energy to speak. Why do my eyelids feel so heavy? He was having trouble moving his arms. Everything just felt so heavy, like his body didn't want to respond to him. His blurry vision began turning black once again. Wake up! Kai's eyes shot open as he heard a voice in his mind yell at him. What? I'm moving. That made no sense to Kai. He wasn't walking, so why was he moving? Through his blurry vision, he could see green and brown shapes go by. Blinking rapidly, the blurriness started vanishing. With his vision restored, he discovered that he was moving across the ground. Someone or something was holding onto his ankle as they dragged him across the ground. Memories were coming back to him now. Something had hit him in the back of his head right after he took his health potion, knocking him out. It must have jarred him hard, even with the armor on. Health, 767-940. His health was actually still slowly going up. It hadn't been that long since he took the health potion. In fact, he had probably lucked out because he had just taken the health potion right before being knocked out, meaning it was also healing his head, assuming he didn't have a fractured skull. All he felt at the moment was a headache near the back where he had been hit. He looked around without moving his head, realizing he was being dragged on his side. The side of his head would knock against the rough, uneven forest floor, occasionally bumping against rocks or tree roots. He continued to lay limp, as he didn't want whatever was dragging him to know that he was awake. He was lucky. He gave Nock a small prayer of thanks, knowing full well he could have died from being bludgeoned in the head. Kai needed to find out what he was up against so he could determine his next course of action. Closing his eyes, he tilted his head down, tucking his chin towards the base of his neck. With his head in place to look down his body, he opened his eyes ever so slightly so that he was able to see but would look as if he was still unconscious. The creature was small like a child, but its skin was a pale, sickly green with brown circular spots across its naked back. When it turned its face side to side, he could see a large hooked nose and sunken black eyes. In one hand, it held a sizable, jagged wooden club half the size of its own body. In the other, it grasped his ankle tightly. Goblin Foundation level 99. A goblin? What is it doing in the Ashbourne Kingdom? Concentrating, he could hear the goblin mumbling. Sparkar find prize. Now Sparkar join warrior tribe, the goblin muttered softly. He was clearly talking to himself, and from his tone was upset about something. Sparkar hungry. Through Kai's slitted eyes, he could see the goblin taking peeks at him. His eyes looked like Akane's right before a big meal. Fucker wants to eat me. Just one bite? No one in tribe notice. Sparkar tell them he was like that when Sparkar found him. Kai really didn't like that look in his eyes. Just a nibble, the carnivorous goblin added as he wiped away a thread of drool coming out of his mouth. Time to fight. Checking his status, he noticed his health had crossed over 800 and he had 40 attribute points available. Right. I leveled up. Between being knocked out, waking up disoriented, and finding himself being dragged to become dinner, he had forgotten he had attribute points available. Can't waste time thinking. 20 into strength and intelligence each. Vitality, 90, 94. Strength, 90. Dexterity, 35. Endurance, 35. Intelligence, 80. Wisdom, 65. Health, 803, 940. Stamina, 303, 3350. Mana, 478, 650. Good enough for now. All right, when its head turns away, I'll pull my sword out and strike. Kai waited a few moments as his head passed more rocks on the ground. Apparently, the goblin was tenderizing him, using the ground as he pulled him. Now! Kai's eyes flashed open as he activated Gravity Pillar on top of the goblin. At the same time, he pulled his sword out of his sheath. He slashed at the goblin's arm holding him, but it never connected. Eek! The goblin screamed. Unpredictably, the goblin had one-handedly thrown him into the air. He soared for a few seconds before crashing into a tree. Groaning, Kai pushed off the ground. The back of his chest piece had taken the brunt of the attack when he crashed into the tree. Still, he had the wind knocked out of him. Even under the mild effects of Kai's gravity increase, the goblin had thrown him over 10 meters. The sunken eyes were wide and overly large now as they stared at Kai like an impossibility. Stay still, food, Sparkar spoke. He raised his club in the air and then ran at Kai. Stopping the goblin was his priority, especially since he had apparently lost his sword somewhere in flight. He kept activating his gravity pillars, replacing the old one with a new one every time Sparkar stepped out of one. Under the effects of his gravity, which was close to 3 normal gravity, the goblin trudged towards him. With every step, his tiny foot sunk into the ground slightly. Undeterred, he kept coming as if he possessed a one-track mind. Metal gleamed beyond the goblin, catching his eye. His sword was flat on the ground, near where he had been thrown. "Stop, make heavy," Sparkar furiously yelled. Under the effects of his gravity, the goblin began glowing red. He raised the club towards the sky, then brought down his arm in a flash and released the club like a javelin. Kai's eyes widened. He was too close and had no time to dodge. The club-turned javelin smashed into his shoulder, throwing him back. He landed on his back with an oomph, staring up at the canopy. "I hate this forest," he said to no one in particular. He activated his domain on reflex, in case the goblin was still coming at him. His shoulder wasn't broken or wrenched, but it definitely hurt. He groaned and stood up as quickly as he could. Between the increased gravity and his battered body, he was having a tough time. He only had a second before the goblin upon him. The goblin stretched its green hands out to grab him. Weaponless, Kai grappled the goblin's hands. Using his superior height and weight, he pushed at the goblin under the effects of his gravity. Grappling was not his forte, but even 30 levels under, Kai thought he would win. But that's not what happened. In the contest of power, Kai quickly realized he was being pushed back. The small goblin was much stronger than him. 2 indented lines formed in the ground from where his boots were pushed back through the topsoil and grass. This has to stop. Kai started squeezing the goblin hands, hoping to get him to let go. In response, the goblin squeezed back, immediately causing Kai's legs to buckle under the pain. His fingers felt like they were going to break as the freakishly strong goblin caused him to kneel. "Fucking strength build," he screamed in his mind. "Food stay dead," Sparkar screamed even though Kai was 1 meter away. "I'm in trouble if this keeps up." "Wait. Sparkar, let's talk." How you know Sparkar's name? The goblin tilted his head inquisitively. His grip loosened slightly. Everyone knows Sparkar's name. He's the greatest, the strongest. Kai nodded his head, reassuring the goblin everything he was saying was true. Sparkar knows this. Sparkar, great warrior. Other goblins don't see, but they will when Sparkar brings them food. Ah, to hell with this. Kai jumped and immediately kicked out with both his feet against the goblin's face. Stretching his legs, he pushed and pushed against the goblin's face, while his arms were taut. Horizontal against Sparkar's face, the goblin kept his grip on Kai's hand. Take this. Kai bent one knee back and then shot his leg forwards, kicking the goblin in the face. Again, he kicked at the goblin's bare face, but he only growled. Let go. He used heavy blow with his leg attack, kicking at the goblin's face stronger and faster than ever. He felt the crunch of bones under his boot. The next second, Sparkar twirled around with Kai, who was still horizontal. He spun quickly, letting go of Kai's hand as he launched him once more through the air. Landing on the ground, he scrambled to his feet and cancelled his domain. His mana was running low, barely a third of what he had when he started. His health decreased and was lower than when he had ended the fight with the slimes. The older light armor was still mostly unblemished, but it didn't do much to dissipate the force behind the blows, causing him to feel wrecked underneath it. There would probably be a lot of bruises forming underneath the armor. Back near his sword, he hobbled over and grabbed it, while the goblin likewise picked up his club. Even though the goblin didn't look it, under that sickly skin was compact muscle backed by attributes in strength much higher than his. Kai also seemed to be more affected by his gravity than the small hulking simpleton. His stats were definitely more spread out than his green nemesis. Strong as the goblin was, he lacked the necessary dexterity that would make him truly fearsome. As long as Kai wasn't caught off guard and avoided the slow and steady goblin, he would win. The two beings stared at each other. While Kai was measuring and inspecting his opponent, the goblin had a bead of drool fall once again from his mouth. Between all the chaos, he hadn't really seen what the goblin's face looked like. Now he could see its jaw was dislocated and had shifted completely off the center. The goblin still opened and closed his mouth, despite the misalignment, completely uncaring or unnoticed. A bruise in the shape of a shoe print had begun forming on Sparkar's face, where Kai had continuously bashed him, causing one of the goblin's eyes to swell shut. Kai also noted the area had grown a little darker since the fight began a few minutes ago. He had been out in the forest for a while now. The sun was starting to set. Going to have to end this quickly and find my way back. Kai shot across the ground, running fast as he quickly approached Sparkar, who also ran toward him. Glowing red, Sparkar swung down from overhead, but Kai dodged the club as he jumped to the left. Clumps of dirt and grass sprayed against his side from the massive blow to the ground. Responded in kind, he activated Gravity Pillar over the goblin in an effort to throw him off balance since his weapon arm was down. At the same time, his sword slashed at the creature under the usual effects of heavy blow. It flashed across Sparkar's upper chest, causing a mist of blood to spray out. The sword nearly ripped itself out of his hands from the swing, but he held on. Twisting his body the other way and taking a step, he swung again with his heavy blow combination. There was a chopping sound as his sword cut deep into the club. The goblin's eyes were wide and alarmed. Kai kicked against the goblin's hand, pulling his sword out. He didn't pause as he made sure to keep the pressure on before Sparkar could get another attack in or move out of his pillar. He struck again, this time without holding back to account for the momentum. The top half of the club flew up as Kai's sword strike passed through the rest of the club until it stopped halfway through the neck of the goblin. Dropping his half club to the ground in shock, the goblin reached out toward Kai with a slow-moving hand, grasping at the air. Ripping his sword out, blood arced and fell across the grass. Sparkar hung. The goblin's green, sickly skin turned even more pale as he swayed on his feet for a moment before collapsing. You have slain, Goblin, Foundation level 99. Kneeling in exhaustion, Kai took a deep breath. I did it. Chapter 39, Company. Vanguard has reached Foundation level 68. Vanguard has reached Foundation level 78. Kai turned his head around, making sure he wouldn't get ambushed again. As long as he didn't die, this entire disaster of a trip would turn out to be very beneficial for him. He had gained 32 levels just in one day. Even in his first life, he hadn't gained this much in 1 month. It made sense since he was fighting for his life alone and against many enemies. The Foundation realm was also the fastest level through which to advance. Nowadays, people who went from unlocking their magic to entering the Forging realm in less than a year were considered passable. But just because someone entered a realm faster than others didn't mean that they were better or stronger. Everything was dependent on circumstances and opportunities. And this was his. With 55 attributes available, the question was once again where to place them. During his last fight, his gravity had burdened his own body more than the enemy. While he could still move and run, it wasn't easy for him even under his own domain. The goblin had also outclassed him in strength. Thinking it over, the choice was obvious. Vitality and strength would be the most beneficial for him under the increased gravity. But he also needed more variance. He was lacking speed too in terms of movement and reflexes. He was also low on mana at the moment. Adding more wisdom and giving himself more mana available was better than not having it. Placing his attributes, he felt pleased with his choices. Vitality, 100, 105. Strength, 110. Dexterity, 45. Endurance, 40. Intelligence, 80. Wisdom, 75. Health, 711 Rs 1050. Stamina, 222, 350. Mana, 201 Tausi, 750. He noticed his health was down nearly a third. He had certainly taken a beating during the fight with Sparkar, but his armor had protected him, although not completely. Being thrown around and taking the blunt attacks had caused superficial damage underneath the armor. It was also possible at least one rib was cracked or very bruised. His entire body felt tender and sore. The health potion had worn off mid-fight with the brute of a goblin. His head had healed, but the other newer injuries wouldn't heal until he managed to find himself another health potion or waited for them to heal naturally, which would take days, if not weeks. With the forest getting darker, he needed to find his way out and fast. He easily found the tracks back to where he had been. There was a long line through the grass and dirt from where he had been unwillingly dragged. Just as he was about to leave, he had an idea. Approaching the corpse of Sparkar, Kai grabbed at the ears and cut them off. He could only hope they were distinct enough for the guards to believe his tale of goblins hiding inside the forest. From the stories Kai had been told about goblins, he knew they could get out of hand very quickly if left unchecked. The question is how they got into this forest. After a few moments, he decided he didn't care as long as they didn't impede his way again. If the kingdom believed him, they would send in their own investigators to check his story. His only job right now was to survive. Following the trail back was easy enough. Apparently, the wingtip on his helmet had dragged into the ground deep enough to make a literal line through the dirt back. After a few minutes, he found the slime corpses. To his surprise, there were a few different creatures eating the remains of the slimes. It seems the cores, even broken, were a delicacy for monsters, animals, and humans alike. Horned rabbit, foundation level 39. Rabbit, foundation level 5. Rabbit, foundation level 4. It was odd. There were a few dozen rabbits, some with horns but most without, all gnawing down on the broke slime cores. They perked up for a moment as Kai approached, but quickly went back to eating away. It reminded him of when he had seen the shadow foxes eating the bee corpses. The circle of life, indeed. Kai decided he wouldn't try to fight them. Perhaps he would have if his mana was full, but it was barely back to a third of its maximum. Not like I'd managed to get a level from them anyways. Skirting the field of slime corpses and rabbits, he found himself back on track to leaving the forsaken forest. For 5 minutes he walked, hoping he was going in the right direction. He walked carefully even though it was nearly dark. It wouldn't do him any good to get ambushed if he tried to rush out of the forest carelessly. During his journey, he had to cross the shallow stream. His boots kept his feet dry, even though the water went up to his ankles. Groaning slightly, he climbed up a small embankment. When his head peeked over the embankment, he saw something he hadn't expected to see. A human-looking corpse was on the ground, dressed in a familiar grey and red robe. "Is that?" He felt a pang of sadness come over him. On top of the corpse, there were 5 hairy rodents, each ripping off parts of the body and chewing on them. Looking around, he didn't see any rat corpses or any other corpses at all, though he did notice there were some broken trees, burnt grass, and blackened tree trunks. Diseased fang rat, foundation level 57. Diseased fang rat, foundation level 58. Whatever had killed Hector must have left, leaving the scavengers to come to pick apart his body. There is no way Hector would lose to a bunch of rats 20 levels lower than him and not leave a single corpse. Running up near the body, Kai could see the ripped and tattered robe sleeve. Underneath was the recognizable sleeve of tattoos he had seen every day for the last 3 months. "Off!" he yelled at the rodents when they neither stopped nor moved at his presence. Instead of scurrying away, they turned and hissed at him, protecting their claim. Sword out, Kai decided to clear out the vermin before checking the corpse in detail to be absolutely sure it was who he thought it was. Taking a few steps forward, all the rats attacked simultaneously. They moved quickly, darting at him at speeds faster than his own. Too fast and numerous for his gravity pillar, Kai activated Domain, even though he knew it would drain his already low mana quickly. Immediately, the rats' speed halved, but still were quick enough to be a nuisance. The worst part was they had split up on each side of him, dividing his attention. This was the pain of gravity magic. Short of crushing his opponents to death or stopping them entirely, which his magic obviously wasn't strong enough to do, he had no ranged attacks to stop enemies before they reached him. Sometimes Kai wished he could just chuck a fireball or some blood magic at his opponents. He kept swiveling his head as the rats encircled him. Behind him, one of them jumped at him, but Kai was ready. He swung his sword single-handedly while twisting his body towards the rat, trying his best to keep his eye on the others. Instead of splitting the rat in half, he narrowly missed his target. The rat ended up on top of the flat of his blade as it continued running towards him down the length of his sword. Another rat jumped at him from his left. Acting on reflex, his arm swung back, bashing the rat against his bracer, tossing it back. He felt a sharp pinch on his right thigh. Disregarding the other 2 rats that were somewhere behind him, he thrust his left hand out with the help of heavy blow. He felt his ligaments and muscles scream as his arm shot down the top of his blade, snatching the rat just as it was jumping towards his face. Ignoring the pain and strain in his arm, he squeezed the rat's body hard. Its mouth opened, screeching in pain. Hanging on its snake-like fangs were bloody strips of flesh and robes from the corpse. Seeing it enraged Kai further, his fist tightening around the rat as hard as he could. Trapped in his hand, the rat's eyes bulged, but that didn't stop him. He had no mercy for the animal that would eat his friend. A moment further passed until he heard a pop and subsequent quiet, the rat no longer squeaking, coupled with the resounding ding inside his head. Dropping the corpse, he reached down towards his thigh and grabbed at the other one who was still gnawing away at him. He found purchase on the small body and squeezed with everything he had. He felt the rat let go of his thigh. Pulling the beast up, Kai could see the look of panic on its face, but that pity was disregarded when he saw blood and flesh in its mouth. His own blood and flesh. Disgusted, he threw the rat towards a tree with his heavy blow. Although he had thrown the rat with his offhand, it still made contact with the tree. A resounded crunch timed perfectly with the ding. You have slain diseased fang rat, foundation level 58. You have slain diseased fang rat, foundation level 57. Vanguard has reached foundation level 79. What happened to the other 3 rats? Turning around, Kai's heart nearly leapt out of his chest. A fox who looked just like Aani was sitting there, just watching him. In front of her were the other 3 rats, all dead. Kai sputtered, "How? What the... Aani?" Kai was rendered speechless. Was it some doppelganger or another fox who had the very same styled fur as her? It couldn't be another fox. Even in Kitsune village, among the 200 other foxes, Akane's coloring positions had always been unique. So that must mean somehow Aani, who had not joined him for the expedition, was here right now. Wait, maybe it's an illusion. He rubbed his eyes. Nope, she was still sitting there, her eyes so full of mischievous joy. Forest Fox, foundation level 60. It's her. How in the nine she did find me. More importantly, how did she get here? Kai tentatively reached his hand out. He was still half convinced she was an illusion he was suffering from. Maybe even mind magic. Running his hand down her head and back, Kai felt the familiar sensation of fur worth its weight in platinum. He quickly picked up the fox and hugged her to his chest plate. Aani, I have so many questions. But they are going to have to wait. Thank you for finding me and helping. But we need to leave. She gave him one of her signature yaps in response. Placing her back on the ground, Kai limped over to the body and kneeled. He felt grief as he recognized the body. It was Hector, or rather it looked like Hector. It was difficult to discern at first. The corpse had all the physical characteristics of Hector, the same hair, eye color, and tattoos. But underneath the battered, half-eaten, bloody body, it was not the corpse of the young 16-year-old Kai had grown to know. Instead, it was the corpse of an old man that looked like Hector. The face and remaining hand were wrinkled, with liver spots scattered across the face and body. The body reminded Kai of Mr. Dravenport, his history teacher, the man on the cusp of dying from old age. Somehow in the half-day that had passed, Hector had somehow aged 80 years and died. It was unfathomable. Kai suspected powerful time magic might be able to do such a thing, but someone powerful enough to turn Hector into a husk of a man he once was would have just killed him outright. Upon closer inspection, he noticed torn holes in the robe, with even more wounds underneath. It looked like some of the test dummies at the academy when a spear had punctured their chests. The flimsy robe fabric had not stopped whatever he had fought. Placing his hand over his friend's face, he closed Hector's eyes, hoping to give the man peace in death. A thought occurred to him. Was this how I looked when I died? Did I appear so pitiful and mutilated? Kai wondered what Lucien and the others had done with his corpse after he died. Had he been buried? No, it was more likely his corpse had been burned to a crisp or strung up at the gate of the destroyed city of New Hope as an example. I'm sorry, Hector. I can't bury or destroy your body, nor do I have time, Kai said softly. He knew once he left, more scavenger animals or beasts would find the body and finish the job the rats had started. Aani had waited quietly by the side, giving him the time to examine his friend. Let's get out of this forest, Aani, he said. Pushing off the ground, Kai stumbled. His injured leg gave way, causing him to fall on top of Hector. He tried to stand again, but his leg wouldn't support his weight. Alarmed, he looked down at his leg. Through the small hole in his thigh, where the rat had chewed through his black underclothes, the flesh had turned black. He had expected to see blood and a small depression in the meat of his thigh, but instead, the wound was bloodless, and it reeked of death. Chapter 40. Outmatched. Necrosis. He felt nothing in his thigh. The flesh and muscle art the site had died. He ripped away more of his underclothes near the wound, making the hole bigger. The necrotic rot had already spread to the size of the bottom of a beer glass. Visible to his eyes, he saw the black skin slowly push out, making it larger by the second. His health was dipping too. Already it was below half. Fuck. 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 He had been careless, or more like he lacked the ability to focus on multiple opponents as once. He knew it was wishful thinking that the rat would merely take a chunk out of his thigh. Instead, it had infected his body with necrosis. If he didn't take care of it soon, it would spread deeper into his leg until eventually that leg wouldn't be able to move. Kai looked around for anything useful. There were plenty of plants and herbs around, but he knew nothing about herbology. He could just as easily consume a plant that would make him die faster, or one that did absolutely nothing. Squeezing his eyes shut, he cursed himself. Wait, just maybe. Now that Kai's life was on the line, he disregarded the decency and respect that was due to a corpse. He patted around Hector's body, praying that he had something useful on him. The man had always been prepared. Under the robe, he found 2 pouches. One was filled with bronze and silver coins. Why even bring coins to an excursion? Inside the other pouch, to Kai's dwindling delight, were travel rations. Something he hadn't thought to bring. Not that it would matter in a few hours if he couldn't find a solution to his necrosis problem. He started patting down his once friend near the hips on the opposite side. It only took a moment before he found what he was looking for. Underneath the robe were 3 vials. One was broken, with shattered glass and remnants of red liquid inside. The other 2 were still whole and corked. Shattered vial. Weak health potion. Standard health potion. His eyes lit up with happiness after identifying the 2 potions. He had been right. Hector did bring his own supply of potions, not simply relying on the instructor to provide them. He had been better prepared than Kai. The weak health potion could heal bruises, minor cuts, and other topical ailments. Kai didn't think it would be strong enough to handle something more dangerous, like necrosis. Meanwhile, the standard health potion was a gem of a find. He didn't know how it would interact with his necrosis, but it could mend broken bones and other stronger injuries. For the price of a single gold coin, it had better heal his current injuries. There was no need to think further. He didn't want to be wasteful by using 2 health potions in case the weak health potion didn't fully heal him the first time. He popped off the cork of the standard health potion and down the red liquid. A strong itching sensation spread out across his body, eventually settling on his shoulder, ribs, and thigh. Kai stared at his thigh unblinking. The health potion was doing its magic as the dead black skin began to recede to a smaller circle until it vanished completely. Kai fell back onto his arse, sighing in relief. He watched his health go up faster than ever, the standard potion outstripping the weak in terms of performance without question. Take my money. I'm buying a dozen of them when I get back to the city. After Kai's health was back to full, he knew it was time to move. He couldn't wait here to recover his mana. The body would attract more monsters, and perhaps even bring ones he couldn't handle. Aani had sat at his side, patiently waiting for him to heal. With the necrosis gone, he was able to stand unimpeded. Fresh, smooth pink skin covered where the once black death had been. Time to go. Kai had hoped he was nearing the forest edge after finding Hector. He gave one last look to his friend before turning his back and leaving. Aani trotted by his side. She had a contemplative look on her face. Kai could tell because of the way her eyes were looking at the ground instead of looking in front of her. The trees were beginning to thin as he neared the forest edge. Less ambient noise could be heard around him. All he had to do was find a road and pick the right direction to the capital. He had a 50-50 chance. Kai's eyes widened with confusion, immediately followed by fear and panic. In the distance, he could see the silhouette of some kind of beast. Through the shadows, he could tell it was taller than him, even on all 4 legs. Something about the creature set off alarm bells in his head. Identify wasn't working since he wasn't able to make out any details about the beast. It might work if he went closer, but he didn't want to alert it. Something that large was likely a higher level than him. Even with Aani beside him, assuming she would help, he didn't think they should fight it. Beside him, Aani growled lightly, her body arched in an aggressive stance. Kai's eyes went wide in fright, but the creature didn't appear to take notice of the noise. Relieved, Kai motioned for Aani to retreat backward. They would find a way around the beast and out of the forest. Taking a tentative step back, he kept his eyes trained on the beast. No reaction. He took another step, and then another. He walked back until a dreaded familiar sound of rumbling. Aani's stomach was protesting loudly. Aani at least had the decency to look apologetic. Returning his eyes to the silhouette, he saw its head raise. Under the shadows of darkness, he saw bright orange eyes lock onto him. The beast roared at him. Kai blanched, hearing the familiar sound. "Run!" he yelled. Instead of running backward deeper into the forest, he cut to the side, hoping to still get out of the forest. He glided across the forest ground as fast as his low dexterity could carry him. Aani effortlessly stayed to his side. His eyes were wide in terror as he looked back. Running on all 4s, the beast was chasing after him. Not only that, but it was also gaining ground quickly. No longer wreathed in shadows, he could see the beast in all its terrifying glory. Reflected in the moonlight, he could see it was the same type of beast that killed the instructor, only smaller. Its entire arm, the left side of its body, and part of its face were charred black. Red blood saturated the hardened spikes on its right arm. Between the burns and the blood, Kai only knew of one person who could have fought this monster, and his body was rotting away somewhere deeper in the forest. Within a minute of running, the beast was almost upon him. Abruptly stopping, Aani quickly turned, doing a 180 to face the monster. Kai also stopped running. For as much of a pain as Aani was, he wouldn't leave her behind. Just as he was ripping his sword out of the sheath, the forest lit up suddenly with light, causing him to shield his eyes. Fire streamed out of Akane's mouth, shooting across the ground until it engulfed the monster. The beast roared in pain as the flames enveloped its entire body. Through the fire, Kai could see the beast was still coming closer, undeterred by the flames. Adding his own gravity pillar to the mix, he hoped to pin it down inside the flames even longer. Akane's fire lowered slightly as his gravity took effect. Kai could see the beast's bloodthirsty eyes above the flames. Spiked earth bear, forging level 41. Kai grimaced, even though it wasn't the same one as earlier. It was still much stronger than him. Any monster capable of killing his instructor almost immediately was definitely above the fourth realm. Kai could only be thankful he had found a young bear, or he probably would have been killed already. Right now he was really missing his blood magic range attacks. Unless he could outright crush or break his opponents, his gravity magic lacked the offensive power to hurt his enemies. Kai watched Aani keep up her flames for 10 seconds, unrelenting in her attack. The monster inched closer regardless. Unleashing a bellowing roar, a wall of earth and dirt rushed out, pushing against the flames until it hit both Kai and Aani. Putting his arms in front of his face, Kai blocked the attack. He felt rocks and dirt crash against his armor, which forced him a few steps back. The attack passed through Kai and Aani, but it had stopped her flames abruptly. After the wall of earth had passed over both Kai and Aani, there was a moment of peace between the three. And in that moment of peace, it was primarily the bear deciding which one he was going to kill first. Patches of fire clung to the bear's fur, illuminating his wild eyes which shifted between Kai and the fox until they settled on Aani, finding her to be the bigger threat so far. With unexpected speed, it pushed off the ground and swung a giant clawed paw toward the small fox. Taking advantage of its disregard, Kai dashed to its side. Heavy blow activated as he stabbed his sword straight into the bear's side. Maybe this won't be so hard after all. Immediately upon contact, he felt a great deal of resistance against the bear's hide, but the sword sunk near its ribs. From the corner of his eye, he saw the gigantic paw meant for Aani now coming at him. Barely getting his arm up in time, he held it up as the bear's paw smashed into him. Something audibly snapped inside his arm as he went flying through the air. Health, 536, 1050. Pain erupted in Kai's arm as he tried to push himself off the ground. For the first time all day, he tasted iron inside his own mouth. Even though he had blocked the blow with his left arm, the force of it had shaken him to his core. He was confident the attack had snapped a bone in his arm, a critical injury in the midst of battle. Aani was shooting concentrated streams of fire at the bear, playing a game of cat and mouse. As she attacked with fire, she ran back using her superior speed, then shot fire again. Still stuck halfway inside the bear's ribs was his sword. By now most of the bear's fur was charred black, but the rocks scattered about its outside remained normal. Kai shot another gravity pillar at the bear, slowing it down as it chased after Aani once more. He saw Aani give him a glance before returning to her fire breath attacks. Trees and bushes were now engulfed all over the battlefield, giving the area light as the fight continued. Kai was at a loss for what to do. Aani would be running out of mana shortly. The rate of her attacks was fast for the little Foundation Realm fox. He also noticed she wasn't teleporting, which meant either she couldn't do it in the heat of battle or didn't want to waste her mana. Kai knew he had to do something soon. Once she ran out of mana, she would be useless, and he would be swordless. Running behind the bear, he tried to approach it while it was distracted by the fire. The bear looked more pissed off than injured, despite looking like an overcooked piece of meat. It hadn't slowed down yet. Ignoring the flames concentrated on the bear's face and front, Kai ran in from behind and grabbed onto his sword, pulling it back with both hands. The bear tensed, causing its muscles and body to tighten its hold on the sword. The pain in his left arm was excruciating as the sword slid out slowly. Finally free, he prepared to stab into its side again, but the bear didn't give him a chance. It took a swipe at him again, forcing him to jump back. He could tell the bear was getting annoyed with this game of tag. Kai didn't get a chance to attack again. The bear had shifted focus from Aani to him. He tried to slow down the bear as he retreated backward, but his gravity pillars didn't seem to matter much to the physically powerful specimen. The bear ran at him faster than he could move backward. He could see Aani preparing to breathe fire somewhere behind the bear, but she looked ragged, her body heaved as she took deep breaths. To his surprise, she looked like she was enjoying herself, with an odd smile on her face. Swiping its paw into the ground, it launched dirt and rocks at him. Too many to dodge, he covered his face with his arm. He felt the impact of rocks smashing against his armor and unprotected areas. Each hit felt like he was being bludgeoned with solid steel. Face still covered, he felt something powerful grasp his leg. Before he could see what it was, he felt himself being ripped into the air as he was swung from side to side like a rag doll. Squeezing his fist closed tightly, he tried to keep his grip on his sword. The intense stabbing pain in his leg threatened to knock him out as his vision blurred and unblurred. Through the shaking, he saw his left leg was partially inside the bear's mouth. Its razor teeth crunched down, tearing the muscle and skin on the back of his shin. His Alderlight shin guards were protecting the front of his shin, but his calf was getting shredded and torn. The teeth had reached his bones. Agonizing pain flared as teeth grated on bone. "Ah!" he yelled. Somewhere in his left leg, he felt the bone snap under the massive pressure from the beast's jaw. Through pain-induced tears, Kai saw Aani still trying her hardest to attack the bear, but the small fox was woefully underpowered for the fight. Still, in the jaws of the bear, it swung him around until he felt a small impact against his armor. He heard a small squeak as Aani's flame suddenly stopped. No longer hearing Aani, Kai prayed she was still alive. Still hanging out of the bear's mouth, Kai pulled his upper body towards the bear's face as he slashed at it. Heavy blow flashed across the unsuspecting bear's face, and a spray of blood shot out. They both roared in pain as Kai was dropped onto the ground. He tried to scramble backward, but between his broken arm and leg, he struggled to move. The pain overwhelmed him. Looking at the face of the bear, it had a slash mark across its face and right eye. Fresh blood was flowing over the charred black fur of its face. Its one eye trained fiercely on Kai. His arm shook as he pointed his sword at the approaching bear. It took one step, then another towards the human that had caused it such agony.